afternoon session, June 14th, for the Portland City Council. We're now in session. Carla, please call the roll.
Fish.
Here.
Saltzman.
Here.
Udaly.
Here.
Fritz.
Here.
Wheeler.
Here. Just quickly on code of conduct for meetings, please, everybody, do your best to be respectful. Everybody here needs to feel safe, welcome, and heard. We request that there not be any heckling of either residents or of staff making presentations. Any disruptions obviously aren't tolerated. If there's a disruption, you'll be asked to leave. And if you are asked to leave and you choose not to do so, then you're subject to arrest. But hopefully that is not even on anybody's mind on such a beautiful afternoon when we have so many great things that we want to accomplish. There are a number of items we did not finish this morning. So Carla, I'm going to ask you to read the following four together: 687, 688, 689, and 690, please.
Okay.
And that's procurement, Christine.
687, accept bid of Stellar J Corporation for the Alder Pump Station Upgrade Project for $3,169,500. 688, accept bid of Titan Utilities LLC for the Fano Creek at Southwest 45th Avenue Culvert Replacement Project for $902,605. 689, accept the bid of Landis and Landis Construction LLC for the Raymond South Tabor Sewer Rehabilitation Project for $4,176,283.
And just for the record, 690 is a second reading, so there'll be no further testimony. The record's closed on that item. But perhaps you could briefly tell us about the others, and we'll ask if there's any public testimony.
So good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. I understand you've had a long morning and trying to get to the time certain, so I was just going to answer any questions if you had them on the any of the procurement reports.
Colleagues, are there any further questions on any of the procurement reports? Seeing none, is there any public testimony on either 687, 88, or 89?
No one signed up.
Please call the roll. 687. Commissioner Fish.
687, Mayor, I move the report.
Second.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Commissioner Fish, for reminding me that the report had to be moved, as does 88, 89 need to be moved. Commissioner Fish moves. Commissioner Fritz seconds the procurement report for 687. Any further discussion? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Fish. Thank you. Saltzman.
Aye.
Udaly.
Aye.
Fritz.
Well, as usual, Chief Procurement Officer Christine Moody, your write-up is exemplary and it's very easy to know what's happening here. Thank you. Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye. Thank you. The report's accepted. 688, please. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Commissioner Fish moves. Commissioner Udaly seconds. Any further discussion? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Fish.
I just want to acknowledge that the MWESB participation on this one is just terrific, so nicely done. Aye.
Saltzman.
Aye.
Udaly.
Aye.
Fritz.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye. The report's accepted. Please call 689. Motion from Commissioner Fish.
I move to accept the report.
Motion from Commissioner Udaly.
Second.
Second from Commissioner Fish. Any further questions? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Fish.
Aye.
Saltzman.
Aye.
Udaly.
Aye.
Fritz.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye. The report is accepted. And that leaves us 690. That is a second reading. Please call the roll.
Authorize an intergovernmental agreement with Metro to provide funding in the amount of $50,000 for the Regional Construction Workforce Market Study.
Please call the roll.
Fish.
Aye.
Saltzman.
Aye.
Udaly.
Aye.
Fritz.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye. The intergovernmental agreement with Metro is accepted. That takes us up to the time certain item 693.
Appeal of John Hollister against the Portland Historic Landmark Commission's Historic Resource Review decision of approval with conditions in the River District Subdistrict of Central City Plan District for construction of a 6-story office building with a penthouse and 3-story underground garage at Northwest Gleason and Northwest 13th Avenue, LU 16-153002 HRMAD.
So the city attorney is going to start off by making some announcements about today's hearing.
Your Honor, the correct city attorney
So can you like fake it for 2 minutes?
Well said, well said. I think that
Very
just
good.
about frames the discussion.
That does. So let me take a shot at it, and then the city attorney will come in and correct all of it. This is a land use hearing. The first thing that we're going to do is publicly declare any actual conflicts of interest and any ex parte contacts we might have had with regard to the parties. We will then hear a staff report. The staff will have approximately 10 minutes to provide their staff report. The appellant will then have 10 minutes to clarify their appeal. I want to be very clear that both for the staff report and the appellant, we will not deduct time if there are questions asked by the city council. So the time that is spent asking questions, the time that is spent answering questions does not count towards that 10-minute time frame. We will then hear from supporters of the appeal. You will have 3 minutes each to provide your support of the appeal. The principal opponent will then have 15 minutes to discuss, rebut, or provide answers to any issues related to the appeal. Then opponents of the appeal will have 3 minutes. The rebuttal by the appellant is 5 minutes. There will be council discussion and then either future scheduling or a decision. I want to be clear that the timeframes that have been provided here are part of code. They are not arbitrary to the city council, so the timeframes I'm giving you are actually standardized required timeframes. Legal counsel, I don't know how much of that you heard, but hopefully I provided mostly accurate information.
To clarify, it sounds like you've gone through the entire schedule of order of presentation.
That's correct.
Then I will not talk about the order of presentation. I will jump to the fact that this is an evidentiary hearing, which means you may submit new evidence to council in support of your arguments. I'm going to announce several guidelines for those who will be addressing council today. First, to submit evidence into the record. If you have any letters or documents you wish to become part of the record, you must give them to the council clerk over there after you testify. Similarly, originals or any copies of slides, photographs, drawings, maps, videos, or other items you show to council during your testimony, including PowerPoint presentations, should be given to the council clerk to make sure they become part of the record. Second, testimony must be directed to the approval criteria. Any testimony, arguments, and evidence you present must be directed toward applicable approval criteria for the land use review or other criteria in the city's comprehensive plan or zoning code you believe apply to the decision. BDS staff will identify the applicable approval criteria as part of their report to council. Third, you must raise an issue clearly enough to give council and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue. If you don't, you will be precluded from appealing to the Land Use Board of Appeals based on that issue. And finally, the applicant must identify constitutional challenges to conditions approval. If they fail to raise constitutional or other issues relating to proposed conditions of approval with enough specificity to allow council to respond, the applicant will be precluded from bringing an action for damages in circuit court. And I think that covers what I need to cover.
Very good. Do any council members wish to declare a conflict of interest at this time? Seeing none, no council members have conflicts of interest to declare. Do any members of the city council have ex parte contacts to declare or information gathered outside of this hearing to disclose?
Mayor, just because we have a large audience today, I'll just note for the record that we have a tradition in this building of shielding the electeds, the decision makers, from meeting with parties to these quasi-judicial proceedings. That does not prevent people from meeting with staff people or from communicating with staff and to seeking guidance about how this process works, as long as the elected is shielded. So I have no ex parte to disclose.
Commissioner Fritz, then you, Daly.
Yeah, my staff has also met with the appellant.
Commissioner Daly.
My staff has also met with both the applicant and the appellant.
Does anyone present in the council chambers wish to ask any of the commissioners about ex parte contacts or information he or she has disclosed? I don't see that. Have any members of the council made any visits to the site involved in this matter? No member of the council has made a visit. Commissioner
Well,
Fritz, sorry.
I'm sure I must have walked past it at one time or another, but I did not make one specifically for this hearing.
Very good. I will adhere to the same standard. Does anybody wish to ask either Commissioner Fritz or myself about our observations on the visit? Yes, sir. Come forward, state your name for the record, please.
John Hollister for the record. And what'd you have at Andina?
It's really hard to get a reservation. And my schedule doesn't allow me to reserve that far out. But I do love the place, I will confess. Thank you, good question, John. Do any council members have any further issues that need to be discussed before we commence with the hearing? Seeing none, we'll start with the staff report, approximately 10 minutes. Good afternoon, and again, name for the record.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Commissioners. I'm Mike Gushard, City Planner for the Bureau of Development Services.
And Tim Herron, Senior Planner, Bureau of Development Services.
Okay. Presentation, is it up?
Not yet. There you go.
So, these presentations sort of have a way of starting with mystery and then we get to the point. So I'm just going to summarize why we're here, and then get into the details. This is about an appeal of an approval the Portland Historic Landmarks Commission created for an application for an infill project in a historic district. I'll go through the context, both the regulatory context and sort of the urban context and neighborhood for a bit. We'll discuss the proposal very, very briefly. I'll go through the process of how we got here and the decision that was made. And then the appeal and sort of our BDS's reaction to the appeal. And then at the end, questions, of course. So it's at Northwest 13th and Gleason. I think John did the heavy lifting for me on pointing out the location. It is catty corner from Andina, which is delicious. It's on the left there, you can see the height map for this neighborhood. It's 100 feet. That hashing indicates that there is a bonus height potential of 40 feet for this section, so 140 feet altogether. The limit on the floor area ratio is 6:1. With bonuses, it can be up to 9:1. It's in the employment zone, which is one of our more forgiving zones, and is a non-contributing resource in a historic district. So when we talk about historic resources and historic districts, it is very easy to get kind of lost in the details and forget to talk about why they are significant and why they're important. In the case of the Northwest 13th Avenue Historic District, it's important for two reasons. The first reason is it tells the story of Portland becoming an important center of warehousing and distribution on the West Coast. So if you are going to have a proper city and people are going to have things and they're going to make things and send them other places, particularly in the 19th century when logistics were not as good as they are today, they had to hang out in a place before they got to where they were going. And you can see up on the top left, that's a historic picture from the 30s looking into the district. It's actually one block out of the district. The taller buildings down there are the historic district. The other reason that it's important is because of its architecture. A lot of the most significant architects working in that time had buildings in that district. I think that's a testament to how important a place this was to the development of the city, that you would have someone like the Office of Doyle and Patterson come and build a warehouse for you. So when we talk about historic districts, we use a term called character-defining features, and those are the parts of a district or a historic building that communicate to you why it's important. And in the case of the 13th Avenue Historic District, some of those character-defining features are the use of masonry and brick, which you can see in the photos. A three-part design, which in the turn of the century was a way of organizing taller buildings, and then loading docks, which really sort of hits home that this is a place where shipping and moving of materials is going on.
Could you elaborate on three-part design just briefly?
Sure. If you look at the new photo, the contemporary photo there, under the historic photo, you can sort of see the building on the left has a pretty emphasized base, middle, and top. The other contemporary photos I have sort of illustrate that too. Tall buildings were sort of an American invention, at least commercial buildings. And the architects of that time were trying to think, well, what's a good way of organizing this system? And so they created an entry base, a set of middle floors that are all the same, and then a top that's distinct. It's actually based on a column.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And then there's a map of the district over on the right. So the approval criteria for this project and this location are the Central City Fundamental Design Guidelines and the appropriately named Northwest 13th Avenue Historic District Design Guidelines. And the latter is in two parts. There's an exterior remodeling section, which we didn't apply to this because this isn't an exterior remodel, it's a new building. And there's a new construction section, which is what we focused on. Site description, it is currently a parking lot. Like I said, at Northwest 13th and Northwest Gleason, it slopes east to west. It's on a major transit street. And the lot area is around 10,000 square feet. And I have a set of photos here that are just sort of context photos of the area. This is looking north. You can see the lot there on the right. This is looking south. Now it's on the left. You can see the loading docks and that three-part design. Looking east and looking west. So the proposal, the application was for an office building with retail at the bottom. It's 6 full floors with a penthouse. It's at 96 feet, so just under the allowed height limit without a bonus, and has an FAR of 8.16 to 1. If you remember from a few slides before, the maximum with bonuses is 9 to 1. They got to their bonus height with through a bike room. Exterior materials, brick, aluminum windows, and sneak preview, there's a little loading dock feature, which is something that was added to make it compatible with the neighborhood.
Could you tell me about the parking? It's clear in the schematic there's parking. Could you talk a little bit about that, unless that's later in your presentation?
No, it's not. So there's 3 floors of parking with 45 spaces, and entry on Northwest Gleason. Normally, Gleason wouldn't be a street where we would want that. That actually required an adjustment. We moved it onto, it was moved onto Gleason to support the historic district and the character that it had. That street wall and the set of loading docks being interrupted by a large hole for parking would be suboptimal.
Okay, and I assume that parking is intended to be private parking for the tenants of the building as opposed to a public parking?
I think
facility?
in the hearings, the exact use of the parking wasn't completely laid out, but
Is that germane to the hearing?
No.
Okay, fair enough.
This is
Thank
all
you.
height.
All right, thank you.
So there's on the top is a rendering. You see 3-part design. The brick, actually use of some distressed brick to sort of make it look older and sort of feel right in the district. And a loading dock feature, which also acts as an ADA ramp. That's actually one of the interesting things about the docks along this street, is many of them have been altered to also function as ramps. So you can see the penthouse on the top and the AXA rendering on the lower left. So 6 full floors with that 3-part design and then a penthouse on the top. So here's the process that this application went through. This is just the BDS process. There was a pre-application conference in January 2016. At that conference, one of the things staff suggested was a design advice request hearing with the Landmarks Commission. Often with a project this size, particularly in a historic district, it's just good to have that first chance to talk to the commission to make sure a project is on the right path. That meeting was in March 2016. The compatibility came up. If the Landmarks Commission was worried for a little bit that it was too compatible and asked that a date stamp be put on the building just so that it showed that it wasn't part of the historic fabric neighborhood. The height also came up, which is sort of the point of controversy here. They were fine with the height given all the other gestures that the building made to be compatible with the district, but made a point that anything higher would have to have further discussion. At a first Landmarks Commission hearing on December 2016, it was not approved at that meeting. There was some fine tuning in the design that had to be done, and some conditions that were out. The applicant responded to those, and the Landmarks Commission was ready to approve at the February 2017 meeting. The appellant asked that the record be held open, so that moved things on to another hearing. March 2017, the Landmarks Commission unanimously approved the application. Then their appeal application was in April 2017, and now we're all here today hanging out together. So the decision, this is right from the staff report. Proposed building fits into Northwest 13th and meets the guidelines. It demonstrates key character defining features, tripartite design, thoughtful detailing of red brick, and a gesture toward the district's iconic loading docks. There was an adjustment in modification. Those are not part of the source of the appeal, so I didn't emphasize those in my report to you today. There were some conditions of approval, which also were not part of the appeal. Which, while we're talking about the appeal, this is right from the application. The appeal statement says the building does not meet the Northwest 13th Avenue Historic District Guidelines approval criteria for height and visual compatibility. That's directly from the application, and the appellant will, I think, dig down deeper into that. So in considering this, staff and the Landmarks Commission were familiar with the district enough. I have a set of historic buildings in the district and their approximate floors and heights. So Irving Street Lofts, I think, is the tallest building in the district. It's around 89 feet tall, depending on how you measure height. These are approximations of the sort of perceived height or the parapet height of the buildings. That building actually has things that are taller on it, like a penthouse and mechanical units. The Keene building is directly across the street. It's the historic Simon building, actually. It's around five floors and 75 feet. The Chown Lofts, 7 floors and 85 feet. At the bottom is the proposal. The parapet is at 86 feet, and the top of that penthouse is at 96 feet. And the commission felt like that was acceptable in part because the visual height of the building would be the 86 feet.
And that's because the penthouse is set back?
You like conjured up my next slide. Yeah, yes, that's why. The penthouse is in the red marked out there, and it's set back 20 feet from Northwest 13th Avenue and 25 feet from Northwest Gleason. So there's a sight line on the bottom, so it's not sort of visible to passersby. And you can see in the top left there, sort of the parapet with a kind of human form next to it to give you an idea of just how deep that is. They're using it as railings, so it actually had to be pretty hefty. Yeah, so there's one guideline in the Northwest 13th Historic District Guidelines that deals with height. It's the height and bolt guideline 2. It says, buildings in Northwest 13th Avenue Historic District display consistent mass. Buildings are typically 2 to 6 stories in height. And new construction should not exceed the maximum allowed height and density requirements. So the building's 6 full stories with a penthouse above. I felt like it met that's mentioned, like that part of the guideline. The maximum height with bonuses is 140 feet. Maximum height just on its own is 100, and it's 96. The maximum density 9:1 FAR in the proposed building is 8.16 to 1 with that bonus.
Before you get to the alternatives.
Oh, sure.
You've addressed height, but what was the nature of the, quote, visual compatibility argument?
You know, the visual compatibility, I think, was addressed all the way through the guidelines, and there's so many little details on the building that are pulled off from all of the historic buildings. So, I distilled those character defining features down to brick, a 3-part design, and loading dock. Each of those sort of has fine detailing within them, the punch of the windows, the patterning in the windows, and all of that is reflected in both of this building and the historic buildings.
But maybe I misunderstood you, but I understood that there were 2 grounds for appeal. One was height and one was visual compatibility.
The visual compatibility component of the appeal wasn't explained in the application.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
It's been mostly focused on height. And I think it's height, I'll let John speak for himself. I think it is height as a component of visual compatibility.
Go ahead, Mike, you're doing good.
Can you remind me what the allowable FAR without the bonus?
It's 6 to 1.
6 to 1, and how many stories would that roughly translate to? Do you know?
That would be about 4. Yeah. Could be 6 stories, actually, yeah.
Oh. Okay, thank you.
So the council alternatives today are to deny the appeal and uphold the Landmarks Commission's decision, deny the appeal and uphold the decision, but make modifications to either conditions or to the approval, or grant the appeal and overturn the Landmarks Commission's decision and effectively deny the project. If there are any other questions, I'm happy to answer.
So is the main source of concern, as you understand it, the penthouse? Is that really what we're talking about here?
The main source of concern, I think, is generally the height. I don't think it is the aspect of the penthouse, or I think it is the height in total. Mr. Hollister did testify at several of the hearings, and it wasn't just the penthouse.
Great.
It was
We'll
overall
obviously
height.
have a chance to hear from him
Yeah.
directly. Good. Thank you.
I guess just as give me some context, when we evaluate height in a historic district, are we supposed to give greatest weight to buildings that are proximate to this building, or do we look at the context of the entire district?
You
'Cause
know,
you gave us a slide that showed us quite a larger lens. So, I mean, is there a rule of thumb there?
there isn't a perfect rule of thumb. It depends on the resource. And when I say resource, I don't mean just buildings. The district is sort of a resource too. I mean, if this were a residential historic district with completely uniform height and maybe 1 or 2 outliers, I think that you would want to use that uniform height. That would kind of be a character defining feature, and you would use that to say, this is the height that's compatible with it. I feel like in the case of this district, it's a district that has varying heights. And so height isn't the kind of main determinant of compatibility.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. Commissioner Fritz.
I was just wondering, is this your first presentation to council?
It is. Am
Very
I doing
nicely
okay?
done.
Oh, thank you.
Very good. All right.
Thank you.
If you can take a seat, gentlemen, we'll hear from the appellant. Welcome, Mr. Hollister. You know the drill. Name for the record, please.
Yeah. Take me a while to get seated here.
No worries.
That's me.
Thanks, Carla. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is John Hollister, and I am the appellant. I was actually hoping that they were going to go overtime so I could have some extra time too. The city council, or if I go over my time, can I use some of my rebuttal time on this first part?
That's really up to the council as to how they want to address that.
So how much overtime do you suspect you might need?
I don't know. Hopefully it'll be quick, and hopefully you ask me a lot of questions so the clock stops. So, but I don't think, I think it might be 5 minutes.
So the way obviously this is a legal hearing, and therefore we have to be fairly strict in terms of how we run it. Unless legal counsel has a problem, here's what I would recommend, or if any of my colleagues have a comment. Let's get to 10 minutes, and let's see where we are and how much additional time you think you need in order to make a solid case. And then what I would do is grant the same amount of time. It would have to go back to the staff report.
No, you would grant the same amount of time to the applicant who's opposing the appeal.
Very good. Okay, so why don't we consider that as an option, colleagues? Let's see where you are after 10 minutes.
Okay.
Very
All right,
good.
great.
I want to be fair in terms of making you feel like you've had an opportunity to fairly present your case, but I don't want to disadvantage the other side in the process.
Yes, thank you.
In fact, I can't legally.
Yeah,
Could
okay,
we-
Great,
thank you.
thank you.
Could
Good.
we pause for just
Yes,
1 second?
please.
Staff's asking a question that I want to make sure.
Very good.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioners and Mayor Wheeler, for this opportunity. It's been an interesting road the last 18 months since this started on 11 of 15.
John, I'm sorry. I need you to state your name for the
Oh, I'm
record.
sorry, John Hollister. Okay, so this is a journey that I really hadn't intended on being a part of, but the people that I have met during this process have made me appreciate all the wonderful people we have in Portland. And I have met a lot of people that are, good, you can look at that, that'll be a little helpful there. There's a lot of people that I've met that support me, and what I'd like to do is just take a minute and acknowledge them. And would all the people that are supporting the appeal just raise their hand? Thank you very much. So right now, what we have is a situation where the historic district is in danger. The only reason I knew about this was because I was within 400 feet and I got a notice. And this particular process was a flawed process. There were procedural mistakes. There were inaccurate facts. The PD&A bylaws there were some violations there, and there's some potential conflict of interest things that I really can't talk about, but they're currently under investigation.
Counsel, could you let us know when we stray from what's actually in the record here? Because I'm having this sense we're getting way outside the record.
So this is an evidentiary hearing, so they can raise new evidence issues at the hearing.
New issues?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you for the clarification on that. This is not so much about the building, it's the entire integrity of the district. Consciously or unconsciously, this building is what I've termed a Trojan horse that will lead to demolition of the smaller buildings in the future, with putting economic pressure on those smaller buildings. The public voice was just not heard on this. I have spoken to over 500 people on this. I was standing outside of on a first Thursday talking to people with my little sign that I came in my 3-minute thing a few months ago, and was talking to people, and not more than a handful knew that a building was going up. So the appeal outcome, what am I looking for, and what do I think the public is looking for? Is building height must be respectful of the historic district. And what is respectful? 75 feet is what was said at the beginning, at the pre-application process of what the maximum height would be allowed at the beginning. And that's actually what the Landmarks Commission testified originally for in the 2035 plan. And I have several examples that mark around the 75 foot as being a historical district respectful to height. I think that this would be a good time to review and enhance some of the processes. I know there's a number of things going on with some of the things that some of your offices that are taking up. And I'm going to take you through my view of the process. They're good people. I really enjoyed working with Mike. He was always very, very responsive and very, very willing to work with me, and it was a real pleasure. The Landmarks Commission, I think they do tremendous work. I sat at many of those meetings, and I think sometimes just the volume of work is just excessive. Leadership, I think when talking to some of the people, I would get the sense that city staffers are looking for some leadership as well as the public. And to all those people I talked about, there are too many people that just felt that there's nothing they can do. Here is the project website, and to identify myself, that first picture is from my window, and that window is at 21 feet high, and I overlook the proposed site. When I bought my condominium 3 years ago, I assumed that a building was going to go up in that lot at some point. I just didn't know when. So from the standpoint, I'm at 21 feet, whether this is 3 stories, 5 stories, or 10 stories, my view to the south will be altered. So it's really not an issue where I am fighting a building going up there. I believe a building at the proper height should go there. And to me, whether it's 75, 100, or 200 feet doesn't really have a negative effect on any more of a negative effect on my view. The pre-application process was not really a public meeting, but I was invited to attend, and I just was sitting there learning the process. The applicant presented a project. One of them was 140 feet, which represent what Mike said was the limit. The city told them quite emphatically that 75 feet would be the maximum they would get, and that's because it's in the historic district. And the guidelines from historic districts supersede, and that gets to Commissioner Fish, what you're talking about, the visual compatibility and as well as the compatibility with the adjacent buildings around it. And that was historical district respectful for me. I was asked to speak at the end of the meeting. I told them I was excited about the process and looking forward to working with the developer and being a good neighbor. Then we got to the April meeting, and the first couple of things concerned me a little bit with the Landmark Commission when they were unfamiliar with the district, and they'd never reviewed a project in the district, and I was a little surprised, but after I understood that there has been no new construction in that building, in that area since 1945, no one was even alive, so that's why no one was really familiar, and they weren't really spending much time. The staff then presented a 100-foot project rather than a 75-foot mentioned. And I went to the staff and said, well, what's going on here? It was 75 last meeting. What happened between now and then? And he said, well, this is where you give your testimony. And I said, well, I'm not prepared. I haven't done any due diligence. I haven't prepared. And then I was assured that at that meeting that I would be able to give testimony at a future meeting. And so I began my due diligence. So you've seen this already as the site here. And let me just do. And here's Johnson over here, and here's Davis over here, and here's the site right here at Gleason. And let's see here. Oops. And when we were looking at the different heights of the buildings, here were the 4 buildings. It was talked about as being the 4th largest building in the district, and I think that was a lot of why where people were feeling very comfortable about it being compatible. But then one of the buildings, the Casey building that was used as a comp, that one is not even in the historic district, so we kind of take that one out of the picture, and then we have I went in front of the Wyden Kennedy building, and I looked at it, and it was 4 stories tall, and it had 122 feet, and that didn't make any sense So I looked that one up, and it was more relevant in the 58-foot level. So we'll get rid of that one there. And then the, over here was listed at 120 for the Irving Street lofts. And so I went to a number of different sources on this, and one that the city used was 89 feet. And so, you know, Carla, is there a reason why I have to hit the forward key on each one of these? Let me see if I can do this another way. Okay, there we go. I can do it that way. So what I found was I just went over to the building owner and say, hey, what's the doggone height of this thing? And I looked, there's so many different things on the building, and they said, well, it depends. It depends on where you are. It's 92 feet on Northwest 13th, but there's penthouses in the back that fit 14, that's 120 feet. So it's all over the board. Here's a chart that more effectively talks about all of the heights in the buildings of the whole historic district. The average height, and this goes back to the compatibility, the average height is 50 feet, and this one is proposed at twice the height of the average district. These buildings, whether this is 89 feet or 120, that was built in 1924, and over here the Chown Pellas, the other one was 1910. The only recent construction in the area or projects are right here. These are just outside the historic district, and 3 of the commissioners voted on this one. This is project block 136, where it, and I'll show you a little later, came in at 76 feet because they wanted to respect the historic district. And this is another building that's outside the historic district that's also going at 75 because they want to respect the historic district. So my first question, if we are respecting the historic district outside of the historic district, why aren't we respecting the historic district inside the historic district? We don't want anyone to get kicked out here. So I have a couple of buildings that are historically respective, and I'll try to go here a little faster. This is the Grand Belmont building. It's in the historic district on the other side of the river. The developer
John,
presented.
sorry to interrupt.
Okay.
So that's 10 minutes.
Yep.
So how much time do you think you need to get through your presentation?
4.5 minutes.
Perfect.
Okay.
Colleagues, does anybody have any objection, assuming I provide the same balance to opposing points of view? Is this okay? Very good. Continue.
Okay, here we go.
4.5 minutes, please.
I'm going to talk a little faster here. Developer presented 3 properties, 14, 15, 23 stories. This particular area is zoned at 175 base with a 50-foot FAR. And, okay. And the Landmark Commission said that's not compatible. And what the developer presented, a compatible building at 7 stories, 81 feet high. And that's what the building is there at 6 stories with a penthouse. The next one is block 136. And this was part of what I talked about in the judgment of, that was said about the step downs. And the city council decision was 76-1 for Northwest 13th Avenue and 150 for 12th. And here are those 2 buildings. This is the building.
When was that decision made?
What's that?
When was that decision?
I believe it was 2015 or maybe the beginning of 2016.
Thank you.
Yeah. This is a building that is currently in design review. It's on the other side of the street from the from block 136, and that is being in at 75 feet. It's still doing some more design work. So I was really proud of all my research I did, and when I went to the next meeting, the commission said that the height that was already decided last meeting. And then Kurt's here, so you can talk about this. He said the project is a little larger than we'd like, but it's not really setting a precedent because it's the last buildable lot. And then it moved to materials, and I felt, and I wrote in a subsequent letter that I felt my my testimony was pretty much ignored. And I couldn't understand why it had switched between date to date. And then I found some more information as I dug before the next meeting, is in the 2035 plan, the Landmarks Commission had recommended 75 feet. And here's what the zoning is. Here is our existing zoning where Mike went through it, 75 plus FAR and 100. Here is where the subject building is. What the Landmark Commission, just to make it easier, said 75 feet the entire way. That's what we want to have. And then with testimony from the masses, it was switched from 75 to 100, and that is what is going to you in September, that height. So we'll look at the masses here. 5 people spoke. And I redacted the name of, this is the property owner, but it's come fairly public who this person is. So it's Al Solheim who spoke. So really it was Al Solheim, Patty Gardner, and Dana and Tim that were speaking. And poor little Kurt down here was saying, I want 75 feet. And the property owners would say, no, we want it the way it was. And then Patty, representing the Pearl District Neighborhood Association, said, no, I'm going to reject what Landmark Commission says, but we're okay with it being 100 feet south of Hoyt. So they changed the decision. So I'll make this a little bit bigger so people can see it. This was the staff rationale of why they wanted to change it. And so basically we're saying because of the building's at 75 feet, I'm going to go quick. You have to be speed readers. And so all these 75-foot buildings that we were talking about that are affected, there's 2. There's Chownpella, and they'll never agree on being able to add additional height. And the other one over here is the only other 75-foot building, and that one's actually owned by Al Solheim. All these other buildings here are very, very low, and they're going to face real mandatory seismic upgrades. And so if they say financial hardship, they can possibly have their building demolished and rebuilt with a higher building. Okay, there we go. Violations of PD&A. And so both the letters that were written by Patty Gardner are null and void because she didn't follow the proper procedures. And then there's also some personal conflict of interest. A lot of reasons, and I'm done, I guess. And then I'll have a minute or so left with in my rebuttal to read my last slide.
Commissioner Fritz.
So in your mind, what would you think that the height should be?
Sorry. 75 feet is what represents to me historic respectful.
So are there any other buildings in the area that are higher than 75?
Say that again?
I'm now confused with which ones are accurate and which ones are not. Are there other buildings in the district that are above 75 feet?
Yes.
And how big are they?
That's not really sure. One looks like it's 85 feet, and another one is anywhere from 89 to 120, depending on which measurements you want to look at.
Thank you.
I have a couple questions. You began your presentation by referring to this as a Trojan horse, and it would lead to demolitions. I think I understood your argument, but I want to give you a chance to state it again.
Good, thank you. Let me go back up here. With this building going in at 100 feet, all of these small buildings will have tremendous economic pressure because if I have a 25-foot building and I can build a 100-foot building, that building has a lot more value. And if I have a small building here and I'm facing a $200,000 seismic upgrade, it would be a lot simpler for me or a lot more profitable for me to say, hey, listen, why don't we just tear this thing down and build a taller, more expensive building? And so the further part of that argument is this is a very similar, almost exactly what happened in Greenwich Village in 1959. And in Greenwich Village in 1959, to Commissioner Fritz, to your point as well, is there was zoning for diversity. A slightly advanced development of this concept was proposed by Greenwich Village civic groups, their area adopted by the city of New York in 1959. On certain streets, the height limitations for buildings were drastically reduced. Most of the streets affected already contain numerous buildings in excess of the new height limitations. This is not evidence of illogic, but is precisely why the new limitations were asked, so that the lower buildings remaining could not be further replaced by excessive duplication of the more valuable tall buildings. Again, sameness was being zoned out, or in effect, different zones in, even though in a most limited fashion or in a relatively few streets. So that was in Greenwich Village, and they had buildings over 100 feet too in that district. So it's New York. So I figured that, I mean, the limitation probably wasn't that much, but the height limitation in that area, Greenwich Village, is 40 feet.
And let me ask you one other question, if I could. I want to make sure I have all the numbers right. The proposed building comes in at 96 feet. If you did not count the penthouse, it would be about 86 feet. And you've suggested the height should be 75 feet. Does your 75 feet, is that inclusive of any penthouse space?
Yeah, and my 75 is 75, and with nothing higher than 75.
So I'd just be interested in your thoughts about the penthouse, because the penthouse space seems to be set back, and therefore it has, I mean, to me, from the sidewalk, if I were looking up and I couldn't see it, the building might actually look like an 86-foot building with a setback penthouse. What are the aesthetic concerns you have in terms of historic context of having a setback penthouse?
Yeah, and once again, that's a great question, and I'm a software salesman that's pretty good at research, so I don't know. I'm not an expert. I do have some experts that are testifying in my 3-minute type things. So I'm just going off of, so the expert I would go to was the Landmark Commission and what they recommended to 2035 before 5 people came and had everything changed. So I go with their expertise, and so I hope that didn't sound flip.
No, it's helpful, thank you.
Further questions for now? Very good. You can take a break.
Okay, great.
Thank you, John, for your testimony. Next, supporters of the appeal will have 3 minutes each to testify. And then the principal opponent originally was scheduled for 15 minutes, but we'll add, was that 4.5 additional, Carla?
Yes.
We'll
Yeah,
add
4.5.
4.5 minutes to the principal opponent, should they wish to take that extra 4.5 minutes. So if you could please call the first 3 supporters of the appeal, state your name for the record, 3 minutes, and we're going to be pretty hardcore about that 3-minute cutoff.
Gary Riddick, Jim Pedernori, and Danny Cohen.
And gentlemen, you'll see the yellow light flash when you have 30 seconds, and it'll beep once, and then it goes crazy when you hit the 3 minutes.
He's very, very high maintenance.
That's right. Okay, go ahead.
Welcome. Gentlemen, whoever would like to start? Great, thank you.
Thank you. My name is Gary Reddick. I'm an architect in Portland. Mayor, Commissioners, it's a great opportunity to be here and share a few of my remarks. I haven't been here in some time. I've kind of been out of the spotlight. But I made a decision to come in today to offer some observations and remarks to what I hope is a constructive conversation. We are here because opinions seem quite divided on the issue at hand. We are here because of Senate Bill 100 and the passage of a requirement for putting boundaries around urban growth. And we are here because of the expert hands that have designed our land use strategy, professional planners, politicians, citizen activists, in setting about to make Oregon and Portland a model of livability. Along the way, the good work got discovered. The integrity of our strategies was on display. We received accolades and awards internationally, and it seems now everyone wants to move to Portland. The construction of new buildings continues to amaze. To meet this unprecedented arrival, we have had to revisit our planning strategies and the capacity in our zoning to accommodate the migration. And inevitably, we increase our height limits and enlarge the FARs because we must. Let me pause for a minute in order to put my remarks in context. I am an enthusiastic urbanist. For my 45 years as an architect here, I have supported our land use planning. I've taught about its virtues at universities around the country. Along the way, I've pressed heights and FARs to the max. Quite a few years ago, my firm was on the front page of the Tribune for 5 days in a row for trying to import FAR from the Lloyd District to a site in the Goose Hollow neighborhood for a high-rise. We have seen many examples over the years where neighborhoods have risen up to offer protection of their precious place. We were quite appropriately defeated in Goose Hollow. We worked with the neighborhood, scaled the building back, and passed design review on the first trip. I've come to have a great regard for the word precious. It seems to always lead to a good place. It was behind the making of the urban growth boundary, and it should be in every conversation as we continue to shape our urban place. Protect your precious treasures. 1.5 more minutes? I'm sorry.
Let me ask this, Gary. What is the basis of your support? If you could just summarize why you're supporting the appeal.
Yeah, and I want to say, I hate to cut off testimony. I don't like doing it.
3 minutes
And ordinarily
went
during-
just like
It
that.
does, and ordinarily during normal
I'm
council session, I don't,
just
but
saying
because
that I
it's-
think
it's a
as an urban
hearing.
planner that 75 feet was the right decision in 2015, and it's the right decision now. I would just end by saying we never know what is enough until we've seen what is more than enough. From my opinion, 75 feet is enough.
Very good. You answered the question well. Thank you. So we'll hold people to 3 minutes because this is a legal process, and if we don't give everybody the same standard, that's grounds for an appeal to our process. Thank you for your testimony. I appreciate it. Good afternoon.
My name is James Pettinari. I am a professor emeritus of architecture at the University of Oregon and a former director of our Portland program who worked with the city on many different issues concerning urban design. We are the ones back in 1983 who did the first real study of this area, then called the last place in the downtown plan. And it was called the last place because every other area had been studied and studied except below Burnside. And so the American Institute of Architects sponsored a national study, a RUDAT study. RUDAT studies mean Regional Urban Design Assistant Team, was a service of the National AIA to help cities work on various projects in their cities, and was very influential for over a decade in directing places like Boise, Santa Fe, and RUDAT was held in this district in 1983, RUDATs contain teams of experts, architects, urban designers, economists, transportation experts, municipal finance people, and social studies people from all over the country, came mostly from the East Coast to study the district below Burnside, called The Last Place in the Downtown Plan. We issued a 2-week study and a report which was given to the city and is responsible for establishing the historic districts that exist now, and made all kinds of recommendations that are responsible for what is now called the Pearl District. And I'm here to sort of defend the legacy of that work, because it was very impartial, done by very good people. Our Portland program offered students in Eugene and new students an option to study and work and live in Portland, oftentimes with the City Planning Commission on various urban issues. We worked a lot with neighborhoods on their light rail station design, on the East Side Freeway, removal possibilities.
Sir, the mayor's about to cut you off, so I'm going to ask you the same question.
Okay, so
what's the basis of your support?
What I would like to do here is kind of outline the recommendations of our study at that time, which is 1983. Everybody pretty much agreed that the national economy was undergoing a major transformation, and to do an approach that would reindustrialize this area would be a mistake. So at the same time, it was really recognized that the outdated, historical, significant, multi-use collection of buildings could really be reused with skillful planning, and that my favorite statement is the value and attraction of the district lies in its differences, and that it's different than every other place in the downtown, and not in the possibility that it can be made to look like every place else. And so we, in this study, documented all the historic buildings. We defined a historic district which exists today, and we recommended a preservation district be identified to help guide and protect the character of the area. And it was the character of the area, its distinctive character, as a collection of all kinds of different sized buildings. We didn't really deal with any specific height limit, but there's so many different kinds of buildings here. Two-story ones,
thank you.
of all different kinds of materials, all
Thank you.
kinds of different heights.
Great. Thank you. You made an excellent point and answered the commissioner's question very thoroughly.
Question about visual
Sir, I'm really sorry. I'm going to have to move on to the next person. Thank you. We have to keep the standard consistent. Good afternoon. I apologize. And if for any reason the council decides to keep the record open, obviously you could submit written testimony if that is the wish of the council. Continue. Sorry.
Good afternoon, Mayor Wheeler and City Council. My name is Danny Cohen, and I just graduated from Lincoln High School. So I'd like to begin my testimony by thanking John Hollister for giving me the opportunity to speak on such a critical issue, and I want to acknowledge Portland City Council for listening. When John first approached me with this situation, I wasn't convinced of its importance. My home is nearly 6 miles away from the proposed development, and I had trouble imagining how it would affect my day-to-day activities. Once I finished speaking with John, however, I realized this hearing is about more than just a building. As a 17-year-old recent high school graduate, I represent the next wave of American voters, a generation that demands government transparency and encourages civic engagement. The actions taken to advance this development jeopardize the core of democratic participation, and while the 13th Avenue Historic District may be small, this precedent of backroom proceedings and silenced citizens will ripple across the entire city. Though I generally find myself on the pro-business side of economic discussions, the proposed initiative concerns me for 3 reasons. First, as an active member of the Portland community and a supporter of dialogue between a government and its citizens, I reject the notion that corporations and politicians can draw plans behind closed doors without acknowledging the input of citizens who will be affected by the decision. Because the choice to increase Pearl East's height to 100 feet was made before John had the opportunity to express his opinion, the decision should not be considered valid. Second, I am concerned by the misrepresentation of data that occurred during previous hearings. Due to the use of high uncertainty satellite approximations by the developers, Pearl East appeared comparatively smaller than it is in reality. While 25 extra feet may seem insignificant, it's telling that a manipulation of the facts was necessary to convince the commission. The purpose of government is to arbitrate conflict between its constituents, and when blatant exaggerations become permissible, the situation yields profoundly unfair results. Third, I am troubled by former PDNA President Patricia Gardner's unreported conflicts of interest and her lack of accountability when choosing not to seek mandatory retroactive board approval for her actions. A governmental decision cannot be considered valid if the public is unaware that its consequences may secretly and disproportionately benefit a given party. While we are here today to discuss the height of a building, what's at stake is far more than 25 vertical feet of concrete and rebar. To approve this development is to sideline future ethical business and reject the transparency and engagement that our citizens demand. Whether you're anti-development, pro-business, or somewhere in between, it is evident that the proposed height increase for Pearl East has not been arrived at through legitimate means. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it.
The next 3 are Tracy Prince, Brent McCarter, and Matt Craven.
Hey, John, Mr. Hollister, could you grab his test? There you go. Don't want to lose this. Perfect. Look at that. We don't need a fruit chair. Good afternoon.
Hi, I'm Dr. Tracy Prince, a faculty member at PSU's Portland Center for Public Humanities, and I write books about race, gender, and social equity. I'm also the vice president of the Goose Hollow Foothills League, and Goose Hollow advocated for lowered heights in this area of the Pearl in the Central City 2035 plan because of exactly what John Hollister has argued. If allowable heights are too high, it will incentivize the demolition of this historic district. I'm also on the board of the Architectural Heritage Center and a member of the Portland Coalition for Historic Resources. Both organizations argue that the most affordable and most sustainable buildings are the ones already built. Research from the National Trust for Historic Preservation shows that in city after city, historic districts help achieve density without demolitions. Yet Oregon has some of the most lax laws for protecting historic buildings than anywhere in the country. Allowing excessive heights on this project will artificially inflate the value of the underlying lots, putting incredible development pressures on the 13th Avenue Historic District. I really appreciate John for spending $5,000 on this appeal, but I'm very disappointed that his Pearl District Neighborhood Association didn't join him on the appeal. As I discovered through John's advocacy and the Northwest Examiner article, the former Pearl president sent land use letters on Pearl letterhead, which the PDNA board was unaware of and did not vote to approve. I have read the PDNA bylaws, which were in place at the time the letters were written, and this is absolutely not allowed. The bylaws explicitly state that any letter not approved by the board should be declared null and void. As John has stated, these letters were important in shaping the Landmarks decision. So it is necessary to reassess the decision. Number one, because of misleading information on nearby heights that Landmarks used to base their decision upon, and because of Landmarks based their decision on letters indicating Pearl District support of increased heights, when in fact, this appears to be the opinion of one person and was not endorsed by the board. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Hello, my name is Brent McCarter. I'm a resident of Portland for some time. I bought my home in the University Park area, neighborhood, in 1976. In all those years, I've watched as Portland has grown and expanded, and at the same time, held very precious its areas that would not change, or at least would maintain their historical significance. Areas such as East Portland Grand Avenue, Irvington, Ladd's Addition, most recently near me, Kenton. These are areas where one can look at them and get a sense of what people looked at many, many years ago, and I value that. We use words recently, at times I believe too lightly. Historic, conservation, planning, sustainability. Specific to today's concern, we talk of compatibility in an area of 21 buildings where only 2 exceed the height of 75 feet. I would suggest that if a building now is going to be built and is compatible, it's hard to understand how it can exceed 75 feet and be that. I drove up this historic district today on the way to this building, and I had that sense of someone who went along the loading docks many, many years ago. And although this new building will respect the facade of a loading dock and the facade of the building, it will tower above some 18 other buildings, and the 2 that exceed the 75 preferable height were built nearly 100 years ago. I submit this with great respect. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon.
Hi, my name is Matt Craven, and I'm here as a friend to support John Hollister. John and I have worked together for about 8 years, and one of the things that I've always appreciated about having John on my team is he has a unique ability to collect and correlate and present information in an unbiased and non-judgmental way, which allows decision makers the opportunity to make the most informed decisions possible. As a longtime resident of Northwest Portland, I'm grateful that he's used this unique ability to collect and present this information to all of you today so that you can make the most informed decision possible. My wife and I have both lived in Northwest Portland for almost 15 years, 10 of those in the Pearl District where we met. The Pearl is such a unique neighborhood, and as someone that travels throughout the country, I see so many cities working to attempt to create the environment and the community and the atmosphere that exists and has existed for so long in the Pearl District, and it's hard. And the Historic District is the heart of this. You know, when you walk through the Historic District on a summer night, you know, you can't help but turn to whoever you're with and say, this is like walking through a movie set. And in the winter, when it snows, Northwest 13 becomes this amazing little village all lit up. It's a special place. So I'm glad that John has had the opportunity today to share this information with all of you to consider as you make a decision that could potentially impact the authenticity of the Historic District, which is such a special place. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well under 3 minutes.
The next three are Mark Smith, Mary Sipe, and Sean McLeod, and that's all who signed up on the support.
Very good. Thank you.
Well, I guess I'm the first one up. My name's Mary Sipe. Hello again. I just want to say a few things. I've been a Pearl District resident since 2000. I've watched the neighborhood change and grow over the last 17 years. It's my home. When I first moved to the Pearl District, the PDNC restrictions were 7 stories. And then a waiver to that height was granted to the Park Place building at 19 stories. And ever since then, it's been nothing but 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 26, 28-story buildings. I live in a building that is 6 stories tall, and it's flanked by a 28-story building, a 20-story building, and a 26-story building. Imagine that. Let me see here. I scribbled a bunch of notes. Well, originally the area was to be warehouse design, and if you walk through the neighborhood now and you see the high-rise shiny buildings, it's completely lost that, except for little pockets where the neighborhood was first developed. A couple of things that I just want to point out. John is absolutely spot on about the risk and the danger of demolition of existing buildings and the precedents this will set, and I hope you keep that in mind. That's a really, really important issue. I also want to say, like the penthouse, seems like that's, not even being counted as part of the height, and it needs to be included, because again, it sets a precedent. And again, we're already looking at, well, if you look at it this way, it's so tall, and if you look at it that way, it's so tall. Let's keep it at 75 feet. I am concerned about, I think if you look at the crowd of neighbors that are here today, a letter on a neighborhood association letterhead supporting this project, unfortunately, I do not believe is representative of what the neighbors really want. And I hope you won't give that a lot of credit, because I think there'd be more people here if it wasn't 3 o'clock on a weekday afternoon. I think this comes down to two words. One is, well, so increased height, we hear, equals density. And density is great for some reason. But what does density do? Density equals more units, and more units equal more money to the developer. It's about money. Let's keep this also to one other word, respect. I think this morning's city council session is a great example of lack of respect. And so to me, that word is really important. And it should kind of be the word of the day. Let's respect this neighborhood. Let's respect the work that went into establishing these guidelines. And let's not just throw the baby out with the bathwater. Thank you. 4
Very
seconds.
good.
I'm really on.
And just to clarify the lack of respect at this morning's session, I'm sure you do not mean this august body.
No, I mean the lack of respect shown not just to this body, but to the people here from the city who were participating. And,
Absolutely.
yeah.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
Thank you for saying
anyhow.
so. Thank you for your
Thank you.
testimony. There were two other folks. Are they here?
Mark Smith or Sean McLeod.
Are either of those individuals here? Very good. So we will now move to the principal opponent. Ordinarily, they'd have 15 minutes, but we've added 4.5 if you'd like to take that or not. It's at your discretion. And again, name for the record. Good afternoon,
morning,
sir.
Mayor Wheeler, members of the council. Stephen Pfeiffer, 1120 Northwest Cooch, Portland, Oregon, 97204. I'm joined here by Phil Kissling, and Susanna Stanley will comprise our presentation. We won't take the 20 minutes, I'm fairly confident, because we're pretty organized for 15. At the outset, I'm a land use attorney, and I'm familiar with land use appeals. Many of them have a legalistic flavor. Many of them address, I'm sure you agree, to the micro level, criteria, the credibility of evidence conflicted in both ways, and a few other things. This appeal does not rise to that level just by the nature of the review. The criteria are highly discretionary. Design guidelines, be it Central City or the landmarks, are just that. There's a lot of flexibility. They're grounded in policy. But we've afforded the commissions, both design and landmark, a lot of latitude. It doesn't turn on traffic counts. It doesn't turn on substantial evidence in any real way. What the evidence is what you see and what the landmarks saw. I will admit, and so my remarks were going to be even shorter than they're going to be, but I came to this hearing confused about what this appeal was about, and it was difficult to prepare because the appeal statement didn't mention any of the guidelines specifically, didn't identify any specific error that the commission made allegedly in applying those guidelines. It was rather kind of a blunderbuss statement, and some of the questions from you of the appellant reflected that. I expected I'd be educated with a much more focused testimony about, again, where the error is allegedly in that Landmarks Commission review. I didn't get that. What I heard from the appellant and I heard less, frankly, as to the criteria from the other speakers, was he clearly doesn't appreciate or enjoy the procedural process that affords substantial amounts of participation in this commission and any other BDS system in the city. And I practice throughout the state. The transparency of our process, the opportunity for participation is unparalleled in Portland. Often to some of our collective chagrin, but it's there and it served us well. Secondly, I didn't hear a single guideline or criterion mentioned at any point in the appellant process thus far. Not a one. There's no amplification or greater detail from what was in the written. I still don't know which guideline they think has been violated. What I hear instead is a challenge to the policy that was set by your predecessors. I was on the Planning Commission in 1990 when we set that 100-foot height limit. It was thoughtful. It was deliberate. It was based on a lot of testimony. It took into account the character of this particular historic district. They clearly don't like the policy that's in place. They participated, and maybe they'll succeed in front of you with that height change. I have a very difficult time believing that in a DAR proceeding for this, one of your staff said the height limit was 75 feet. When, as Mike pointed out, and as the maps have reflected since 1990, it is 100 feet, with bonuses of taking it up to 140. Now, that either reflects a misunderstanding or a misrepresentation, and I don't particularly care which, but it doesn't support this appeal in any way. With that, I'm going to leave you with one thought. There is a place where I do agree with the appellant. Your decision on this building, this landmark's decision of approval, will set a precedent for the district, but it's not the one they claim. The underbuilds in that district, of which there are many 1 and 2 stories, some with more architectural character than others, will ultimately be replaced. There's little doubt in my mind. It's not a museum piece. The precedent will flow from what the next building, the new construction thereafter, like this building, looks like. There are 2 measures of protections that this city has put in place, guarded by the BDS staff and your commission's review, with the ultimate stop at this point with the council. The commission's landmark, the landmark guidelines themselves and the Central City Fundamental Guidelines will dictate the look, feel, massing, and height of any subsequent buildings that are built in this district. This building, I would argue, and you'll decide, sets the bar for those subsequent redevelopments, those subsequent new buildings that are going to be constructed in this district. So if you do think of this as a precedent, I agree. And you'll have to decide whether it's a positive, a neutral, or a negative precedent. But it is a precedent for the next new piece of construction that comes in that district, measured by your commission and staff against those guidelines, and it will happen. And what you decide here will either set that bar or another bar. And I'll leave you with that and turn it over to Phil to talk about what's before us today, which is the building. Following that, Susanna will talk about what otherwise should be before us today, which is the specific findings and criteria that were addressed by the Landmarks Commission and what their conclusions were and why. Thanks.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
All righty. My name is Paul Kissling. I'm Principal of Architecture with McKinsey. We were tasked with designing this project. And first of all, I'd really like to thank the city process. We've had great interaction with city staff, both with Tim and Mike, and our meetings with, starting with the pre-application through DAR and 2 presentations at hearings, and then a final unanimous approval from Landmarks Commission for this project. A couple of things we'd like to point out before we go to the next slide is, the 2035 guidelines are not at issue here. We are currently approved in this district at 100 feet. And we certainly started this project with that knowledge, as well as the research of all the guidelines of both Central City and the district. I've been in historic preservation for something over 40 years. I take that very seriously. And our client, who has invested in the city of Portland and in this site, also takes that very seriously. And one of his major marching orders to us was to deliver a building that looked like it had always been in the district. As the planning staff has noted, this is kind of the infill of the missing tooth. It's a significant building, but it is very small and completely adjacent to us when we talk of underbuilding. Just to the east of us, a building can be placed on that side at 175 feet and still be within the Pearl District overlay. So, we are balancing our design within the district to without the district. That's the entire Pearl neighborhood, but we're driven specifically by Central City and the neighborhood and the historic neighborhood. that if you want to, we kind of wanted to talk a little bit about the amount of outreach that we put out with all of our projects. You know, when we started this project in September of 2015, we worked through our planning staff, of which we have a very robust planning staff, which most of you have probably encountered, researched all these standards. They codify everything for us and start to build the vocabulary that we're going to use to design the project. At an appropriate point, we outreach and set up our pre-application with the city to make sure we clearly understand all the guidelines, all the restrictions. From there, we applied for and had our first DAR, which Landmark gave us a very good review. It was almost an approval hearing. The design was along, but still obviously subject to different people's interpretations and desires. Prior to that DAR, we did present to the AIA Historic Committee and received their support and by a vote of the whole committee. We were not able to present to the neighborhood for their schedule in front of the DAR, but we met with them thereafter, about a month, presented the project to them as it had been and the recommendations that we'd received from the DAR. Their Landmarks Commission votes on whether they're going to support a project. It's not one person's process. And they agreed with concerns that we tried to deal with, that they endorsed the project as well. Height was obviously and bulk are very much discussed in all of these proceedings. And on the next slide, we kind of came away from our DAR advice with 5 major areas we really wanted to address specifically, as well as all of the projects' criteria. Height and bulk being one of them, and then also the commission had pretty much told us they could support, as the guidelines require, a 2 to 6 story building in the district. They were uncomfortable if the building appeared to be over 6 story. So that led us to, it was an option whether there was an active roof. As you guys probably realize, around the city, rooftop amenities have become a very desired amenity to offer tenants on commercial office buildings. So we did proceed with a quote penthouse, and it's really a, you know, we refer to it as an active roof. It's well set back from the street wall. The street wall of the building is 86 feet, still below the height criteria, and even at the highest point of the building, we are still below the 100 feet that is currently the standard. And we'd like to point out that height is only one issue of compatibility. If we, you know, we would feel like we could have designed a building 140 feet that would reach, still be compatible with this district and still meet the guidelines. There was discussion with Landmarks that they weren't comfortable with that, and the client was in support of that notion, so we worked in that direction. This is just, you know, our study of massing. The base height of the district is 100 feet, 6-to-1 FAR, with height bonuses to 140 feet, and if you were doing residential, you could have actually went to 175 feet. We're doing office only, retail on the ground floor. The client has an obligation to replace the existing parking that is on that lot that is empty right now. And we are compelled to go underneath the building to provide that parking, which is a relatively expensive endeavor. But we do need to replace the parking. There's discussions on how that parking will be used, obviously for tenants of the building, but after hours in the Pearl, much of the Pearl parking is used by other valet parking or other monthly parkers as well. So it probably will, given the cost of each stall, we'll find a way to maximize their use for the district. As you notice from the site plan, on the east side, we're up against an existing building. And on the north, we are tight against 50 foot of our 100 feet against the building, and then the confectionery loft sits back 20 feet from the face of our building. In our early discussions, we met with John personally, and we presented the project to all of the owners of the confectionery loft. It's a 7-owner condominium, both retail and residential. We offered to build a better facade with their help. We are compelled, as we are built to the property line, to have no openings on our exterior walls, on the inner walls. With their acquiescence, we could potentially pursue a better design right on that street corner in that 20 feet. So far, they've elected to not give us the that cooperation, but we do have it as an approved part of our proposal. So we can either give out a blank wall, or with cooperation, we can make it look better. And that's part of the unanimous approval by Landmarks. As you can see, we've kind of set the penthouse back. Our neighboring most attributing building is the Keene headquarters across the street from us at 5 stories. We appear to be 6 stories, which is required by the district of 2 to 6. We set our penthouse level back, our active level back substantially out of sight line, so that the appearance of the building is a 6-story building, very compatible within the district and meeting all the heights. And then section-wise, as you've seen from the staff report, the program is an active roof amenity to the building, creative office space, ground floor retail, highly visible on especially the 13th side with the loading dock, and parking underground. And as you can see, midsummer when the sun does shine, although we're a little late this year, we do not actually shadow the confectionery lofts building in the middle of the summer, and the buildings next to us are lower and have no openings toward us. Just from an overall above view, the building has an active roof on kind of the 2 street sides. The penthouse is pushed well back. All the mechanical equipment is set on a well behind the penthouse that is at the same level as the actual penthouse deck, if you will, the outside area. It's back behind on that far corner. And then eco roof where we can provide one. And again, when we get done, we want to look down this district and see a building that doesn't look like it's ever been there, or has always been there, excuse me. And one thing I would argue a little bit out of recent experience, historic buildings in the districts have such a high value, they're not necessarily torn down. We recently participated in the remodel of a building just 1 block north of the district at Kearney and 13th as a loading dock. It has now been fully seismically upgraded. It has not gotten any bigger. It's a 2-story building. It's reputedly the oldest warehouse in the district. And it has been a national retailer, Design Within Reach, has taken that building, and it's now an active building, and we participated in that building. So we take the district very seriously, and all the property owners do as well. There are some less significant buildings in the district that may or may not be taken down. And I'll turn over the planning issues to Susanna, who can kind of address the actual findings of the commission, who we support.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Thank you. I'm Susanna Stanley. I'm a land use planner at McKinsey. My goals here for you today, after Paul and Steve, are to first note that we, as representing the applicant, support the Landmarks Commission's decision and the staff report and the Northwest 13th Avenue Historic District design guidelines that were set in the early 90s for this area. And our project meets those goals, as the Landmarks Commission found. And second, I want to talk about compatibility. It's a multi-component concept, and height is one element of compatibility. So we'll talk a little bit about a few key criteria and guidelines of the 13th Avenue Historic District and Central City design guidelines that speak to compatibility and demonstrate how this project is compatible, as the commission found. So one finding that Mike pulled out in his detailed staff report was that item 2 in the Historic District design guidelines is height and bulk. Now, the first elements of this standard are that just general statements that buildings generally display consistent mass. Buildings are typically 2 to 6 stories in height. Those are background statements. Those are not guidelines or standards. The guideline is new construction should likewise be at least equivalent to 2 stories in height, which we are, and should not exceed the maximum allowed height and density requirements in the zoning code. That's a straightforward guideline. Our project beats that guideline. These findings that I have here are from the commission findings and staff report, and state that while the building is 6 stories with a penthouse, it appears to be 6 stories, and it meets the zoning code standards, and clearly states it's in keeping with guideline 2 of the 13th Avenue Historic District guidelines. Now, generally, thinking about height guidelines and standards, the purpose of any height standard is to guide new development. It is not so that all new buildings match the height of existing buildings, the maximum height limit is to move new development in the direction that the district is headed and wants to be moving. And so questions about whether the height standard should be 100 feet or not in the base zone are a completely separate conversation. Our proposal meets the zoning code standards and historic district guidelines in place at the time of the proposal. And we've had some questions about the heights of other buildings. So here's a few photos. The Irving Street Lofts is 7 stories, it's 8-story equivalent, has a large ground floor with a penthouse on top. The Wyden and Kennedy building, these buildings are all within the 13th Avenue Historic District. The Wyden and Kennedy is 5 stories in one area, 6 stories in an area, plus a penthouse, and Chownpella is up to 7 stories at the southern portion. And our GIS data that we provided is from the Metro Regional GIS system, and the metadata indicate that it was provided by the City of Portland Permitting Services, and it indicates the ranges of heights shown here, up to 127, 120.
GIS?
Oh, Geographic Information Systems, excuse me. It's mapping data specific to, it's geocoded data for each building. Yeah. So we referred to permitting services data for the heights here. A couple other findings. Those were really the height focused is guideline 2 I presented previously, but other guidelines do speak to compatibility. Compatibility can include materials, the dock, as Mike has emphasized, full lot line buildings, which are also a requirement in the 13th Avenue district, and the windows and other historic patterns, quite a few components. Height is one of them. So these are just a few, you don't have to read this, but just, so I've pulled out here, guideline 4, scale and proportion. New buildings should be of scale and proportion that's compatible with historic architectural pattern. The findings clearly stated that it was. The loading dock and the 3-part design were consistent. 5 is materials, color, and texture. The findings clearly stated that our brick materials, colors, and textures were appropriate. Now to the Central City Fundamental Design Guidelines, which also apply, speaking to several other character-defining features of the building, unifying elements, identifying areas, findings stated that we've done that with the design and brick and dock. 7 and 8 are urban enclosure.
Can I stop you and ask a question?
Yes.
Can you
yes.
stop the clock? So you have 20 seconds left.
I have one slide left, and I can generalize.
Okay, I just wanted to give you that warning.
Thank you.
Great. Go ahead.
Well, this is stuff that we deal with all the time, but you don't have to get into the details. But these are design guidelines, which guide the proposal. They're not standards. They're not clear and objective standards. They're guidelines. And these generally speak to urban enclosure, streetscape. The thoughtful findings created by Mike after the commission's hearings speak to how the building meets all of these design guidelines. Here's a couple more: context of existing buildings and coherency. So,
I'd ask the commission to look to the left on this last slide. I mean, this is what we're meeting for our client's challenge and the district, so that building looks like it has always been in this district.
So Mayor, I have a couple of questions.
Commissioner Fish.
Thank you for your presentation, and let me start with Steve. What is the precedent we're setting here? The guidelines allow up to 100 feet. The appellant has expressed concern about setting a precedent for future redevelopment. Strictly speaking, what is the precedential value of whatever decision we come to today?
Commissioner, that's a fair point, and I guess I wouldn't have used the precedent if not to make the point that it was made first by others.
Right.
Because as I've argued to this body and others, in a quasi-judicial land use context like this, where specific criteria are applied to a specific building, it's difficult to set a precedent unless you're interpreting a code provision or something. These provisions are so flexible and nuanced and subjective that you're going to be hard-pressed to be forced to repeat that interpretation over and over again. The way I see it is the policy statement was made by the city in various settings, but essentially in 1990 when we adopted the plan update and the new code. That resulted in this map, both EXD and the mapping of the 100-foot corridor on 13th. That's the macro policy. In an absence, a design overlay or landmarks, a historic district, as in this case, as you all know, that is the maximum height, and people are entitled as of right to get there if they don't need discretionary review of some kind. Now you superimpose the sub-policies of design review and landmarks, or historic in this case, be it on a building or a district. There's some debate, not in my mind. Those superimposed next set of sub-criteria allow the commission and the BDS staff to reduce an approved project below what's otherwise allowed in the base code. You can reduce the height from 100 feet if it's required to meet those guidelines in design or landmarks. So that gets you down to the precedent question. The question would be, to this point, let's say there's another building that shows up, either in another Bucktooth open space or be it a redevelopment or a casualty loss. The precedent will be, what are the elements we expect of a new building that should be replicated in the applicant's design to ensure that the guidelines are met? And it's what Susanna talked about here. Everybody's focused on height. Height is only one of many factors in compatibility with the existing district. And what Mike talked about, and I think Susanna echoed, the loading docks are a paramount example unique to that district of something that should be replicated, and the Landmarks Commission said that here. The distressed brick, for lack of a better term, some of the ornamental designs, cornices, the 3 tripart construction that Mike referred to, those are all things I would expect the Landmarks Commission, being the sitting members or the next generation of members, to go back and say, let's look at the last big new construction we did in this district and see what it wanted to be and what we made sure it was. And those are the elements you would then tick off. And staff in a DAR would say, here's what that building offered up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you can't meet this, you might want to try again.
So that's helpful, thank you. My next question is, from time to time, even in a quasi-judicial proceeding, I think of our role as a referee, at least to the extent of making sure the process was clean. And there could come a time when there's enough evidence of irregularities that we might say we want to send it back to make sure that what comes back to us is clean. You've heard some of the claims made in this hearing about whether people had authority to submit letters, whether there was enough public process. Without asking you to take, to give your judgment on all those claims, from your perspective, at what point would we reach a point that we'd be well served to send it back to the deciding body to make sure it's a clean decision before we rule on it?
I'll answer it in reverse. In my experience, in this city and elsewhere, it is almost seldom, if ever, because there wasn't an opportunity for somebody to present their view or their proposal below. That's not a reason for remand in the city of Portland. There were no procedural flaws here. There's no allegation of somebody not receiving necessary notice, mailed notice, the 400-foot radius. There was the ability to attend a DAR. I do a lot of DARs, and it's rare to find anybody there other than the applicant or BDS. Mr. Hollister apparently attended that DAR. He also attended 1, 2, and perhaps even, I'd have to go back and look, 3 public hearings, and his direct request for a continuance to allow him more time to submit yet another round of input and testimony led to a 3rd hearing, or at least an opportunity to comment. This process took 1.5 years in a state where the statute is 120 days absent a waiver. Now, there were ample opportunities below. And if that wasn't enough, he had a full opportunity today with a de novo opportunity to present new evidence with time given him by the grace of this council for more opportunity. I see no legal flaw in the procedure, and there's certainly no practical flaw. Anybody who testified today had notice. Nobody was deprived of notice. What would be the basis for a remand? It would delay the project. Interest rates ticked up again today, another 1/4 point. It will jeopardize this project if this is delayed that much longer. You're not going to see a change in a unanimous design commission vote, I would suspect. So I don't see a basis for a remand, Commissioner. What I see is a hard decision of the 3 alternatives you have is 2, deny or approve. Because a remand back to a unanimous landmarks commission who spent 1.5 years and 3 hearings going through this process is highly unlikely to change its mind.
Thank you. Commissioner Udaley.
I'm just seeking clarity along the same lines as Commissioner Fish. I believe there is this bone of contention over a letter issued by PDNA indicating a general support from the neighborhood association of this project. It sounded like one of you, and I'm sorry, I'm jet lagged right now and very tired. One of you said that perhaps it was a subcommittee that took the vote and then a letter was issued. I'm trying to clarify where that letter came from and what it really reflects.
I guess I'd offer 2 points. First of all, I wasn't there, Commissioner, but Paul can speak to the process. Secondly, that is not a criterion for Landmark's approval. That is not a criterion for your approval, and that is not a basis for denial, even if it's true.
That was my second question. What weight
Yeah,
would a
and the answer
neighborhood
is frankly
association-
none, other than either an admonition or a gentle reminder to the neighborhood association if they didn't get it right, to get it right next time, but it does not reflect on the process, compliance with your code, nor does it provide a basis for council to do anything other than think about it. You know, at the end of the day, they are only one participant in a very transparent, open process. And as you know well, we have 86 neighborhood associations now, I think.
95, I want to say.
It's been a while since I've had to think about that. They're one more layer of input. The real implication of a neighborhood association, as I know you know, is that it affects the appeal fee that an appellant has to file if, in fact, it's the neighborhood association for very good policy reasons that files it. That's it. Now, we may have someone from the neighborhood association speaking after us because there's still an opportunity, but I can't promise it.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions, colleagues?
Thank
Very
you.
good. Thank you. We appreciate it. Next up are opponents of the appeal who would like to speak for 3 minutes.
The first three, please, coming up are David Dysert, Patty Gardner, and Riza Farhoudi.
Come on up. And again, name for the record. We don't need your address. At least, I don't believe we do. Legal counsel, we don't need addresses for the hearings. Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you. My name is David Dysert. I'm on the PDNA Neighborhood Planning and Transportation Committee. I also live and work on 13th Avenue, a block from this site. And I just wanted to make the point, I think the defendants have made a solid case about the zoning. This site has been 100 feet. I have the guidelines here for the Historic District, written in 1996. That 100-foot zoning was there the whole time. And the guidelines specifically stating that the height should be appropriate to the zoning code is very clear. In terms of the neighborhood association, you know, the strange thing is I see a lot of people in this room who are opposed to this project, and I have yet to see any of them attend one of our meetings. We are a very open committee. We welcome new members. There's a clear process to participate and to provide input and become a member and a voting member. We do not write letters. I've never seen Patty write a letter on her own without the support of the committee. She's very clear to call a vote, and we deliberate. We are independent, and we form an opinion, and we vote on it. So I really resent the insinuation here that there's something underhanded or untoward. The architects came before us twice. The first time they came before us, Patty actually wasn't an active chair at the moment. The second time, she was. We voted on it, we deliberated it, we found the project to be very compatible, and we support it. And we wrote a letter in support of that, and it's as simple as that. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Hi, Patty Gardner here. We actually wrote 2 letters. There was a first letter written by Kate Washington, who was the planning chair at the time. They are part of the record. I've put them in again. That was written in May of 2016. I was not engaged at all in the committee at the time. I was not even at any of the meetings deliberating this. And then there was a second letter written because John Hollister came to the committee and presented to the committee, presented his side. We probably weren't going to even take a vote, on this project because we already had a vote in the record, and we took a vote at that time, after John presented, not before John presented, after John presented, we wrote another letter. So there have been a lot of lies, slander, innuendo, unfounded personal attacks of me, which I absolutely do not appreciate. But that doesn't negate a couple of things. And you have asked about some zoning stuff, and I want to talk about that, because let's talk about zoning. In the 2035 plan, we asked specifically, and you can go to that Planning Commission hearing that was also slandered, we put in a letter that asked for all the bonuses to be taken off the historic district. If you think about it, the current building is 8-to-1 FAR. If the bonuses were gone, it would be 6-to-1. It would be a smaller building. We've targeted the bonuses hard. And so 2035, there will be no bonuses on the historic district. That's going to make a huge difference. You'll never get above the base height on any project. You'll never be able to add any FAR off of what the base FAR, which is 4-to-1. So that's important. The other important thing is that's also in code. Where's that 75-foot number coming from? It's coming from a lot of work on my part in the North Pearl Plan, where I got a 75-foot reduction of height from Lovejoy all the way to the river. It's 50-foot setback on 13th Avenue, both sides. We have a 2-block gap that is between Johnson and Lovejoy that will be part of the 2035 plan. Well, there will be a 75-foot setback along 13th Avenue for the first 50 feet, and it's going to go, if I'm victorious, it'll go from Johnson all the way to the river. And the reason we did that was, again, to try to have that feel like a special street. We know it's special, and we know that historic buildings are imperiled, and we've been working very hard through the process to make sure that they're protected. Thank you.
Ms. Gardner, I just have one question. Because you were singled out, I think it's only fair that we give you a chance to respond to one of the allegations.
Yeah.
I don't do this to embarrass you or to highlight it.
Sure.
But it's in the record. So
Sure.
I think fairness dictates we give you a chance. One of the claims that you've now addressed has to do with the process and transparency. I think that the 2 letters you have before us fully respond to that. But there's a claim that you had some kind of conflict of interest. And conflict of interest as a concept that we apply usually means there's some undisclosed personal financial stake in something that's before us that if it was disclosed might result in a recusal of some kind. So would you care to respond to that?
I have no conflict of interest regarding this project. I don't work for the developer, don't work for the architect, have nothing to do with that. It was put in the paper that I was, for some reason, that I was working with Al Solheim. I worked with Al Solheim, I think, up until like the beginning part of 2012, and I haven't worked for him since. So I don't understand where the conflict of interest is coming from. I would argue that having a conflict of interest, being a condo owner who wants to use a neighborhood association to protect your view right next door, that might be a conflict of interest. And so just, I have none, and that's just reality.
Thank you.
Commissioner Fritz.
Well, first of all, thank you for your long-time service to the Neighborhood Association. And I'm hoping your memory is better than mine, because I know we did discuss this in the comprehensive plan and in the West End plan.
Yeah.
And we had a specific discussion about the historic district, didn't we?
Yeah.
And so what did we end up deciding?
So in the historic district, like I said, we took off all the bonuses. And so what I was told at the time by staff, that if we tried to take all the bonuses off and we reduced the height, it would be a taking. And so we focused all our effort, every bit of our effort, in eliminating all bonuses. And so that means, like I said, no FAR, no height. You gotta, what you get is what you get. And when that code changes, that's going to be, so that's where we ended up, and that's a big deal.
And did we leave the height at 100 feet?
We did, and the reason why it's 100 feet, and it comes back to 1990, is because we have a number, the conversation about that is we also have a number of historic buildings that are over 75 feet. So all of the historic buildings inside the district would be out of compliance. And so again, staff, and this is very wonky, but the staff was not in favor of reducing it, 1, for a taking, and 2, because it made every taller historic building, non-conforming, basically.
And my last question, the current proposal does rely on that bonus. Would this no?
Yeah,
Or would this proposal be allowed under the new system?
Under the new system, they would not get that 8-to-1 FAR. They would have gotten a 6-to-1 FAR. There was no, if the code existed today, there is no way it would be the size it is, just from a square footage. It might be the height, but it wouldn't be the size, the bulk.
Okay, I was just trying, we
Yeah.
obviously had lots of controversy. We've got 2 new members of the council who
Sure,
weren't
sure,
involved
sure.
in those
I
decisions.
really appreciate the question.
Thank you very much.
Very good, thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Commissioners. Thanks for having me here. My name is Reza Farhoudi. I'm co-chair of the Pearl District Planning and Transportation Committee. I want to walk you guys through the process and how we got to this point. April 19th last year, the developer came to our committee. Patty was not involved in the committee at that time. Kate Washington was the chair, the planning chair. I'm the transportation chair of the committee. We voted on it and voted in support. We liked the fact that it fit the character of the neighborhood almost a bit too well. We actually wanted to see a little more variation. We supported the garage entrance on Gleason because we wanted to protect the integrity of Northwest 13th and the historic district by not having the garage entrance on 13th. And with the base height and with the maximum height of 100 feet and the maximum FAR of 6-to-1, this project met code. And those guidelines those requirements were established in the 1988 Central City Plan. So we're going back 30 years here. I just want to make this point. We play an advisory role as a neighborhood association. We play an advisory role in this process. We compare the proposed height and FAR to what's in the code already. And it is not our place to relitigate the code each time a new building comes to our committee. And if we're telling the developer that they're not allowed to build to the maximum height in the code, that is tantamount to a land use taking. So just to be clear, we are dispassionate observers in this process. We only serve an advisory role, and I cannot make this any more clear. There is no substantiated proof of any conflict of interest, none whatsoever. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next 3 are Carolyn Dow, Kirk Ranzetta, and Glenn Tonisi, I believe is the last name.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. And just, Carla, a time check, how many more people do we have?
I have one more after
Very
these
good.
3.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Mayor Wheeler and City Council members. My name is Kirk Ranzetta, and I'm the chair of the Portland Historic Landmarks Commission. Here today to provide the council with some very brief comments concerning the appeal of our decision to approve the Pearl East building. Before I begin my testimony, I wanted to convey my respect for Mr. Hollister and everyone who's testifying today. I feel that through all their efforts about raising awareness about the issues with neighborhood character in the city of Portland is facing. I wish we had more people like the folks here today who would take an interest in the places that really make Portland matter. In our final analysis for this building under the Northwest 13th Avenue Historic District Guidelines and the Central City Fundamental Design Guidelines, after reviewing the staff report and also considering public testimony, it was the belief of the commission that the height of the Pearl East building was in fact compatible. And when we considered the height in this particular case, I just want to reinforce the fact that we do consider it on a case-by-case basis. The commission felt that the applicant had made significant strides in terms of the architectural detail, the setback of the penthouse, the integration of quality design features, overall window fenestration and pattern, and to building materials to justify the additional height on the building. I think it was stated earlier that all of those factors kind of play into an almost mitigation for the height, that if you're going to make a building a little bit taller in a historic district, that it often helps to have more compatible features so that the building resonates or has a dialogue with those buildings that are adjacent to it. And so the commission absolutely did take into account the physical context of the site and its proximity to other buildings that were similar or close to similar in terms of scale, massing, and height. Commission typically also considers height on a case-by-case basis because we're constantly in this balancing act between detail and other factors. So that's basically it. Any questions?
Commissioner Fritz.
I just want to stress what you just said, that you do consider it on a case-by-case basis. The Landmarks Commission has said that you cannot build to the maximum height in other cases, right?
Correct.
There's not enough mitigation for that, if it doesn't fit in.
Correct. And I mean, just as a point in matter, I mean, if there was another more modern building that was outside the historic district that was shown as an example, if you were to include that in a historic district, we'd be like, we would probably want something else to kind of mitigate for the overall modern approach to the design. And so you're constantly kind of going back and forth between, what the design guidelines say, what the entitlements are, and trying to come up with a happy medium.
Thank you. Thank you for your volunteering.
Sure, you're welcome.
My name is Caroline Dow. I'm a former Historic Landmarks Commissioner. And I was actually present at the initial DAR. I was also a former chair of the Boise Neighborhood Association. The last time I was this close to Commissioner Fritz, we were moving the Edwin Rayworth down Mississippi Avenue 2 miles north in 2013. So I've spent the last 10 years of my life in civic engagement, particularly around reducing demolition of reducing residential demolitions. And that was my role at the Landmarks Commission. And so I do remember this design advice request. It sounds to me like the system, I know there's a lot of situations where you feel like the system isn't working, the intent of the zoning code isn't being met. I don't think this is one of those cases. I've been a part of new developments, especially in Mississippi and North Williams, where community design guidelines are used. Infill is, terrible, low quality materials, and again, I don't think this. I think this is an example of a process that has worked. So the applicant attended neighborhood association meetings. I'm assuming that those meetings were announced. And I personally have had a couple grievances filed against me as a chair of the neighborhood association. And it's not fun when that happens, but usually it's surrounding notification. The letter of support is written, and somebody feels like they weren't notified. And you have to dig into the bylaws and clarify what your notification procedures are. I've also rewritten bylaws. I'd be curious to know if a formal grievance has been filed in this situation with the parent coalition. If it has not, there's a good indication there that the bylaws, they were acting pursuant to the bylaws of the neighborhood association. So I would urge you guys to ask that question. And then is a grievance open with the parent coalition, and what is the status of that grievance? And I guess I'll just end real quick. I think, this is high quality infill. One other thing I take issue with is the notion that this is an altruistic effort to reduce demolitions. I think that's a little bit misleading. I think we want to be really careful when we say that there's developments that are incentivizing demolition. I don't think this building is one of them. I think that this is a building that we can be proud of. High quality materials, loading dock, the design overlay, in my mind, they've done everything right. And I actually went and listened to the original tapes for the original design advice request, and John Hollister himself says, this is a gorgeous building. This is gonna happen anyway. I wish it wasn't happening. And I sympathize with him because of the height and where that penthouse is located and maybe where he lives. But I would say that I would just urge you guys to respect the process that's been undertaken, the choices that were made by the neighborhood association. We should empower neighborhood associations to write these letters and have them upheld. And then the Landmarks decision as well. I think we should uphold those.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Glenn Traeger. I'm a member of the Pearl District Neighborhood Association Board and also the Planning and Transportation Committee. I'm here to represent myself, not the board right now. I'd like to make two statements and make 2 points. As far as the issue about height, I think it's pretty simple and clear. The existing height is 100 feet for the current code. It's been there for over 20 years. It seems like a lot of the dialogue we're talking about is maybe changing heights, but the height is pretty specific. So is the building over 100 feet or is it under? I think it's pretty simple and clear for the commission here to make a decision on that. Also, you have to look at the building in context, okay? One is just the way the building looks in this historical district. And I don't think there's anybody here that would probably disagree that this is a beautiful building and it's in a great framework for the neighborhood. Also, the building, as far as the land use, the building is compatible with the existing neighborhood around it. One of the reasons that the Pearl is such a desirable neighborhood to live in, and you can ask my neighbors behind me, is because people want to be able to live and work and not use their cars. They'd like to be able to just walk or bike to their places of employment. This building's an office building, and it fits well in the context of the Pearl. Right now, there's quite a bit of residential development. In fact, a lot of residential in the Pearl District. And being an office building, this complements the residential with commercial to allow people to live and work together. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
The last person I show is Ian McVersey.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Hi. My name's Ian McKenzie. I'm an architect, although I have no involvement with this project. I'm a resident of Northwest Portland and a former resident of the Pearl. And I love the Northwest 13th Avenue Historic District. It's one of the most beautiful historic districts in the city. I walk along the street almost every week, and if I thought this building placed the district in any jeopardy, I would be here speaking to you on the other side of this appeal. And there's two arguments I've heard about how this building could harm the district. The first is that it will create pressure to demolish historic buildings in the district. And I don't believe that to be the case. The demolition of a contributing resource in any historic district in the city requires a Type 4 demolition review where City Council makes the final vote. And that's a really, really high bar to pass, as I'm sure you're aware. There was a building in my district on 17th where Gordon Edelin requested the demolition of the building a couple of years ago, and the council at the time unanimously voted to deny their application to demolish the building. And I certainly haven't heard anything to believe that City Council would act differently now. So if City Council doesn't believe that historic buildings should be demolished, I don't believe there's any reason to believe that that you would start approving the demolition of contributing historic buildings on Northwest 13th Avenue. And secondly, does the building do harm to the district just by its height and design? And, I don't believe so. That's my own personal belief. I think it's actually a really beautifully designed building that fits the neighborhood really well. But more importantly, that was the view of the Historic Landmarks Commission as well. One active and one former member, of which you just heard from. And that commission is comprised of very dedicated volunteers, all of them who are professionally involved in historic preservation. They take huge amounts of time out of their professional lives to serve on the commission. And if they had issues with the building, you can guarantee you'd be hearing about it, but you aren't. And in fact, as you just heard, they were very complimentary about the building. So I believe that it's something that really does fit the district and will be an asset and, a dramatic improvement on the condition that's there at the moment. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. And the last part of the process before council deliberations is rebuttal by the appellant. 5 minutes. Good afternoon again.
Whew. My name is John Hollister, for the record. And just a clarification, I am a voting member of the Planning and Development Committee that were questioned, so I have become involved. And yes, I think it's a gorgeous building. I just think it's too tall. And I fear the same things that Jane Jacobs did in Greenwich Village. And with other stuff there is, but that was done way back in 1959, so how would that really apply today? Also in New York, I use them as a good model. West Village, they had no height limits in the West Village, 0 height limits, and a 100-foot building was proposed, and it went to meetings, and they came with a council ruling that they had maximum 65 feet with a setback to go to 80 feet with a 20-foot setback. So they also said, they talk about the buildings being non-conforming. Right now, if 40% of the buildings in Manhattan could not be built today. So there are 40% of the buildings that are non-compliant in Manhattan. And Manhattan has so many historic buildings that they are trying to protect. We have so few in comparison. So just even the hinting of moving towards doing something, well, you know what? The developer will never do that. They'll never go that way. They'll do this. And that might be true for this particular developer or the developers that own the property, but if somebody buys it from New York or somebody buys it from somewhere else where it doesn't have the same attachment to this historic neighborhood, I don't think that still will apply. And then just the parts that I just don't like to do, but they just have to be brought up, is that we talk about the two letters from the Pearl District, and one of them, and specifically the one for approval, they didn't follow the bylaws. There's nothing in the records that went to. This was a committee, never went to the neighborhood association board, but also the context of the letter was wrong. I'm going to read to you for the minutes that were approved at the meeting to support the building. Kofel moved to not write a letter. Somebody seconded. Dysert said we have to take a position. Gardner discussed that a vote was not taken the last time. August made a motion to write a letter in support since the committee had embraced the project previously and acknowledged the concern for height.
Excuse me, Mr. Hollister, I just want to interrupt because you've only got a couple of minutes
Yep,
left.
yep, this is pretty big.
Whether or not the neighbourhood association doesn't make the decision on this, so whether
Absolutely.
the letter was germane
Yeah.
or not
Yeah.
is not relevant to the appeal.
My thought that it is relevant to the appeal, and the reason why it's relevant to the appeal from a subjective standpoint, because this is all subjective, is that when the Pearl District Planning Committee, I think they're a valuable resource, and I think that they're organized to be able to be heard and to be considered strongly in decisions that go up, and we use them as that tool. And as someone in the district that had someone say that it was approved for them to have acknowledged of concern for height, and then in the letter that they said that we were happy with the height and we love everything in the letter, that is not representing the individuals in the district, and that goes to Landmark, and that's part of Landmark's unanimous decision, because they're saying, well, if the district is in favor of it, then the district's in favor of it. Another group that got presented to was the AIA. AIA did approve it, but I went and spoke to the AIA and sat there, and because they love the design, I love the design, and when I talked about height, 2 or 3 of them looked at me and says, oh my God, we never thought about height. So everything is subjective. And also with regards to the strength of these guidelines for the historic district, the Landmark Commission has been trying since 2009, and maybe I can make a little pitch for them, since 2009 to get funding and staffing to update the guidelines in the Northwest 13th, because what it says here is they're antiquated guidelines. The standards review are low, vague, and often not currently reflective of the neighborhood interests. Please consider allocating resources for the 13th Avenue Historic District. That was made in 2009 and again in 2011. So this is all subjectivity. When they say you're allowed up to the maximum height, it also says in documents that in a historic district, 100 feet maximum is not an entitlement. It's not an entitlement. Now we got 29 seconds. The height in foreign districts are allowances, not entitlements. Regardless of the number set in the zoning code, the overriding factor is compatibility with the historic district and the guidelines. So 13 seconds. That's what I got.
Great. Could I just ask one clarifying
Yes.
question? So stipulating that height is not an absolute guideline, which of the other guidelines do you think is violated specifically with regard to disallowing the maximum height limit?
The height is a guideline, and it's a guideline. Both height compatibility is both in the state code, and also in height compatibility is also in the historic district. So it isn't, it's the difficult part, and the reason why Kurt went to get 75 feet, because this is a very frustrating process for developers. Because what can I build? I don't know what I can build. What can I build here? Well, we go do this type of thing. That's where they're trying to eliminate it and make it the same. So when he does 75 the whole way and it gets changed to 100 on one end, that doesn't make any sense, because there's no vacant lots. So why would it get changed to 100 if there's not going to be anything built? What would be the same thing of having to be 75 across, because there's no buildings going up? And it would only be if they wanted to do something to those existing buildings, existing contributing buildings, and anything like that that gets raised has a potential of having a future conflict with that contributing asset. So this is my little 21 building. I want one friggin' spotted owl of buildings allowed in all the vast amount of Portland.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Very good. All right, colleagues. Commissioner Fritz?
Thank you. Obviously, thank you, everybody, for coming today. This has been a very interesting and on the point hearing, and I appreciate everybody who's spoken and shown up. I, as Commissioners Fish and Saltzman will remember, was a big advocate for lowering height limits in the West End plan and the comprehensive plan in this area. So I find myself in something of a quandary in that I firmly agree with the Landmarks Commission in this case, that the building, despite being taller, is very compatible with the design guidelines, and I think is going to be a really, I'm not sure that Mr. Pfeiffer said it was set a precedent. I'm not sure that's actually true, because the Design Commission, the Landmarks Commission does rule on each one at a time. In this case, if it does set a precedent, I think it's a good precedent for the district.
So, and I appreciate that. Thank you, Commissioner. Could I ask legal counsel a clarifying question? Because there were many issues raised, and I'm sympathetic to many of the issues were raised. But for the purposes of this evidentiary hearing, what are our options, and what is the scope of our decision-making?
The scope of your decision is the approval criteria, so the design guidelines that are in place. You need to determine whether the facts that you've seen and that are in the record demonstrate whether the proposal meets or does not meet the historic design guidelines. I think there's been some discussion of the neighborhood association and whether their recommendation is relevant. There is no criterion that says you must get a letter from the neighborhood association. So, you know, it's up to you whether the information in those letters is relevant or not to the criteria. And I have not read those letters, so I don't know. But I mean, generally speaking, just the fact that there is or is not a neighborhood association letter is not relevant. One of the other items I heard is the Central City 2035 plan. Those are not, whatever is going to happen when that comes to council is not relevant to the decision based on the criteria. The state land use laws and our code require that you do it on the criteria that are in place at the time they apply and have a complete application. So I don't know if there were other issues you wanted me to address.
I'd like to ask staff a specific question with regard to the height guidelines. So we heard testimony about the 100-foot height guideline. Could you offer some clarification? My understanding is that is not an absolute, but could you explain in what circumstances that is the case?
So the guideline was the text about 2 to 6 floors and meeting a maximum. The 100 feet is in the zoning code. That's the maximum that is allowed. So there's the base zone, which allows for 100 feet, or the zoning code language. And then above that is the guideline, which makes no specific statement about an exact footage.
So reconcile the two for me. You have the base zoning 100 feet by right. You have the 100-foot guideline, which is, as the pirate movie says, a guideline. Reconcile those two for me.
Well, Tim, do you want to, the 100 feet isn't from the guideline. The 2 to 6 stories is from the guideline. So the 100 feet is the entitlement. The 2 to 6 floors is.
To be clear then.
Yeah.
You are interpreting code as the 100-foot is an entitlement by right.
No, Tim Herron, I wouldn't say that.
Is
I'd say it gives us a bench, it gives us a hard line to kind of look forward to. I was in some of those earlier conversations when the team was considering 140 feet. And to be clear, there's actually bonus incentives up to 175 feet. Staff's direction very early on was, let's keep it under 100, and if we need to have a place to start, 75 could be one. I think the important point that Mike's raising right now is relative to the guidelines, it's 2 to 6 stories. Stories is definable. There are 100-foot tall, 4-story buildings. You know, this is a 6-story building with a penthouse on top of it, and it reads from the street about 86 feet. And so I think it's about feeling, it's about scale, it's about massing, and that's a lot of where the Landmarks Commission made their findings for this case, and Mike wrote in his staff report. So hopefully that's helpful in dispelling this idea of 2 to 6 stories doesn't mean it's 20 feet or 60 feet. Warehouse architecture often has much taller floor plates that could get you to 100 feet.
And just so I understand, so the 100 feet is the base, plus there's the opportunity for bonus. And it's my understanding from the testimony that this project includes a substantial number of bonus features. Is that correct?
It has one bonus that allows for a little more FAR.
Okay.
It has a bike room bonus.
Okay.
Were
there others?
There's not another bonus that's being used to extend the height. They stayed under the allowed height.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
So the 100 feet is an allowance, and then in another section of the code, that's where the discretionary guideline is.
Tim, why do we have to wait till 2035 to look at the question of whether the bonus, we have the right bonus scheme?
Because that's to get acknowledged through the.
Yeah, I mean, it's not implemented yet.
Right.
It's in the future.
But we could address that. We could, if we wanted, speed up the review of that issue, couldn't we?
Well, that's probably better suited for a Bureau of Planning and Sustainability person. I'm just the BDS planner.
Yeah. Tell us why we can't do that.
But
that's not germane to this issue because we have to use the guidelines that are in place today.
I understand. I understand. But the issue was raised, and I think, frankly, I think the bonus system should be tightened up. And I think we can have that as a separate conversation.
I think it is being reviewed as part of the Central City 2035 process.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah,
Yes.
which is coming very shortly.
Yep.
So, Mayor, can I just make a comment?
Commissioner Fish, you bet.
I'm going to join with Commissioner Fritz on this one for a couple of reasons. We have a unanimous recommendation of the Landmarks Commission. We have Mr. Hollister, who I have to say as a first-time appellant has done a masterful job of representing his view in this proceeding. But even the appellant has said that he, quote, loves the design. And I think someone else earlier said that it is a high-quality infill. I'll go further. I think in the 9 years that I've served on this body, I don't know that I've seen a more compatible, take height out for a second. I don't think I've seen a design that has more historical compatibility than this. And frankly, there were a number of photographs we saw today that made it almost, I kept having to remind myself what building were we looking at, because I forgot which side of the street was it on because it was so beautifully blended in. I actually think that if we do deny the appeal and uphold the commission's recommendation, I believe we're actually setting the bar very high in terms of future precedent. Because the question that will be asked is, in addition to height, have you gone the extra mile with materials, design, windows, brick, all the various elements in this particular building that has, I think, all of us united in complimenting the design team in the design they presented. The question of height, for me, comes down to 76 feet versus 86 feet. And the reason I say that is that I think in adding the penthouse and then setting it back, I think that actually should be an approach in the future that we encourage, because it is not, in fact, visible from the sidewalk. it does activate the space in an interesting way, and I would hate to see that debited against the overall height that is awarded the developer. So for me, it's the difference between 76 feet and 86 feet. And under the circumstances, because of the extraordinary effort made to make this compatible with the historical fabric, I think the applicant has earned the extra 10 feet. And after all, 86 feet is still within the guidelines. I do want to revisit the bonus system, though. I'm not entirely comfortable with the idea that very modest changes could result in potentially above 100 feet, which I think would be a mistake. So I'm going to join with Commissioner Fritz on this.
So we have a couple of options, and I'd asked legal counsel, and then I forgot because I was so engaged in your answer on my other question. So we can close the record, we can make a decision, we could continue the hearing, we could continue the hearing and keep the record open, we could continue the hearing and keep the record
Mayor, I
closed.
recognize the distinguished lady
Commissioner
from Southwest
Fritz.
Portland for a motion.
So I just move to deny the appeal and uphold the findings of the Landmarks Commission.
Second that.
So we have a motion from Commissioner Fritz, a second from Commissioner Fish. Commissioner Udaley, did you have a
Commissioner
comment?
Udaley seconded it ahead of me.
He always beats me.
No, she got there first.
Okay, so I'll retract that. We had a motion from Commissioner Fritz. We had a second from Commissioner Udaley. And to be clear, the motion was to deny the appeal of John Hollister against the Portland Historic Landmark Commission's Historic Resource Review decision of approval with conditions in the River District Sub-District of Central City Plan District for construction of a 6-story office building with a penthouse and 3-story underground garage at Northwest Gleason and Northwest 13th Avenue. Did I get that approximately correct?
With one small modification.
Please.
This would be a tentative vote today. As we had an evidentiary hearing, we would want to come back for additional findings. And then also to clarify that the record, you would want to close the evidentiary record.
We have the option to close the evidentiary record. That would be my recommendation. However, legal counsel, I'd like to ask for one slight modification. There were a number of people who testified today who were not able to complete their testimony, but they had written testimony. Am I allowed to collect the remainder of that written testimony for people who were here today?
Right now, before closing the evidentiary?
If they were so willing to submit it to the council clerk,
I would do
that
that
be
before
within?
you close the evidentiary record today,
Okay, so
yes.
if there were people here today who testified who did not get to complete their testimony, who can submit written testimony to the council clerk, I would be more than interested in reading those materials. And so,
So Mayor, why don't we just keep the record open till 5 p.m. and take a vote?
the
on
legal counsel squirming.
Well, you're taking a tentative vote based on the evidence you have in front of you. If
Correct.
you're going to take more evidence, then you probably shouldn't be taking a tentative vote. And at this point, there's a
Okay,
motion and a
okay, so
second.
I'm greatly complicating things,
Yeah,
sorry.
let's move to the vote, Mayor.
Okay, very good. Further conversation before I call the roll. Call the roll.
Fish?
There was a reference earlier in this hearing to the conduct that occurred this morning at our morning session, a session that was repeatedly disrupted by people that came not to reason with the council, really to be heard in any meaningful way, but to just obstruct. And we had to take a number of breaks, and it was very disheartening to all of us. Profanity, horrible things said, really for no particular purpose. By contrast, this afternoon, to me, represents the best of Portland, and I say that, I've said that on a number of occasions on these land use, these kinds of appeals, quasi-judicial, because I truly believe they bring out the best in our community. This has been a very thoughtful hearing. In all the years I've served on this body, I can tell you without exception, my colleagues come to these proceedings with an open mind, listening to the testimony, and then trying to work through what they've heard and apply the law. I can't think of an exception to that. Reasonable people can disagree on these because there's a discretionary standard that we're applying. But I want to compliment the appellant for the case that he made and the arguments he made. And I want to compliment the the developer in this case, who I think has proposed a building that will be a tremendous addition to this historic district. And as I said earlier, I think we're actually, because of all the attention paid to making this building compatible with all the other standards that apply, all the other criteria, I think we're setting the bar very high for future development. Reasonable people can disagree about the difference between 76 feet and 86 feet, but we will be vigilant in looking at height going forward, because I think the point has been made that height is important to the overall feel of our city. Aye.
Saltzman?
Well, I do believe this building, as proposed, does blend in well with the neighborhood. The height is well below the guideline. And I do think that the 13th Avenue Historical District is not going to see other properties redevelop because of this building itself. And I think as somebody, I think from the Pearl District testified, all the buildings on the 13th Avenue Historic District are either historic resources or contributing resources. So to demolish them requires a Type 4 review, which is the city council itself reviewing it. And I believe I was somebody who actually authored that with Mayor Vera Katz some years ago. So we don't take demolitions very lightly, and we wouldn't, particularly in the 13th Avenue Historic District. So I'm not worried about the precedential value here. And I do think, as I said, it seems to be a very well-designed, high-quality building, and the height seems well within the guideline, and therefore I also support this and vote aye.
You, Daley?
I think a lot of longtime Portlanders are experiencing, or shell-shocked right now at the rate of change in our city. And I certainly am shocked by the number of new buildings that I would consider a travesty of good taste and design, that are utterly out of character and scale with their neighborhoods. But I believe the applicant here has gone above and beyond to create a building that is compatible with the neighborhood and will add to it. There may be issues around zoning and FIR and whatnot that we need to revisit, but this is not the time or place for that. So I vote aye.
Fritz?
I think Commissioner Fish is catching my enthusiasm for land use review, so this is very encouraging.
It's rubbed off.
Thank you for being here. And what happens with land use decisions, as Commissioner Fish said, they're discretionary decisions. Reasonable people can disagree. And so almost by definition, you win some, you lose some. I appreciate Patricia Gardner reminding us that we did get, Commissioner Fish and Saltzman and I did recommend modifying the bonus provisions, and that, I believe, is coming back next week. So if you don't like the rules by which this got approved, come back next week, because there's several other decisions that are going to be coming up for the rest of this year about height in the downtown area, about height on the waterfront. Some of those decisions I won in the preliminary rounds, and some I didn't, but I've now got 2 new colleagues, so we can have another bash at it. So please stay engaged, and as was invited, go to the neighborhood association, participate, because this is really a place where, this place in particular, City Hall, but also the City of Portland, is where you can make a difference. An individual can make a difference. And again, I thank the appellant for highlighting the issues, which really set us up nicely for next week for that discussion. So thank you very much. Aye.
Wheeler?
Oh, one more thing, sorry. I did just want to say, Mike Richard and Tim Herron in the Development Services Bureau, thank you. Excellent work.
Wheeler?
So by the time these issues come to us, we're fairly narrowly constrained in terms of the way we frame the decision that we make. It's an evidentiary hearing, and as you heard, it is about the guidelines and the interpretation of the guidelines. I was actually very interested in some of the other questions that were raised that frankly are not part of my decision-making process with regard to this evidentiary hearing. I think the policy questions that were raised are paramount, including the preservation of historic assets in this community. If we lose them, I think it is to the peril of this community. We don't want to be like every other city in America. We have our own history, our own traditions, and our built environment and our architecture reflect those histories and traditions, and we dare not lose them. I think that the process questions that were raised are paramount as well. And it's always disappointing for me to have to come to this pointy end of the conversation and have people feel that they were disrespected or their views weren't heard or the process didn't reflect the input and the considerations of the community. That's also really important. So, these policy issues, these process issues, they are paramount and they are important. But with regard to the evidentiary hearing today, I think it is clear-cut that the appeal, in my opinion, based on the vast preponderance of the evidence, the appeal should be not denied. John, I want to thank you. I think you have gone the 9 yards and then some on your own, and frankly, I sort of wonder why you were out there alone. And I wonder, I'm going to be thinking, okay, how did it come to be that there was one guy initially sort of going through this process, attending these meetings? It feels like it should be broader than that. So I look forward to that conversation with you. I want to thank staff. I think they did a great job of laying this out and answering my myriads of questions and helping me understand it. I want to thank everybody who took 2 hours out of their busy day to come in here and be heard. I'm truly appreciative of that. And I always feel grateful to be the mayor of a city where this kind of dialogue takes place. So I will vote aye. The motion carries. The appeal is denied.
And so we need to set this for adoption of
So
findings.
can we set a date, please?
We believe that July 5th is available, and we have
Just the mayor's gone, or the 12th, and everybody's here.
Are we on the clock?
No, we're not on the clock, but the parties have, staff has said they could meet the 5th, but if you want to do the 12th, that's okay with everybody as well.
Colleagues, do you
Is
have
that
a
in the
preference?
morning?
It'll be a morning, right?
Yes, because I'm not here in the afternoon of the 12th.
Does the applicant care either way? It sounds like we have a sounds like we have a full house on the 12th.
So we've taken our tentative vote. We will then carry this over to the 12th of July. That is the consensus.
Yeah, do you need
Correct?
time? Time certain? Okay, yeah, July 12th, it'll be 10:20
what's up?
a.m.
July 12th, 10:20 a.m., time certain. July 12th, 10:20 a.m., time certain, for those of you who'd like to come back and do this some more.
Except that there's no testimony. at
Right,
that
no
point.
testimony, the record is closed. Very good. Thank you, everybody. So with that, we will move to item 691.
So Dan, I'm all
691, amend contract with Impact Northwest
with your office,
for
and then
relocation
I'm gonna-
services by $79,308 for a total value of $238,308 to support expansion of housing relocation program and extend the date to June 2018.
Colleagues, given the rate of rising rents, short-term housing, and including hotels and motels, which are also increasing their prices, we're bringing forward this contract with Impact Northwest. The rising rents create a problem for households that need emergency housing and for households seeking low-barrier options because of credit, health, or past criminal histories. Due to the Portland Housing Bureau rehab policy and the Uniform Relocation and Real Property Acquisitions Act, more commonly known as URA, there will be an increased need for resources and partners to temporarily house or relocate households when the Portland Housing Bureau funds the rehabilitation of a given building. The URA Act is very prescriptive in terms of how the process must take place, from the timing of notices to the calculation of benefits, to ensure that no tenant experiences any financial burden or displacement as a result of a public entity's acquisition. So Portland Housing Bureau benefits from having partners that can assist us in meeting these guidelines in a way that provides the most benefit to affected renters. Good afternoon, and thank you for your patience.
Yes, good afternoon, Commissioners. Good afternoon, Mayor Wheeler.
Before you start, Carla, what's the number of the item before us?
This is 691.
691.
So, Commissioners, the item before you is to increase the amount of compensation to our...
I'm sorry, Darren. I should be clear, colleagues. This is the final item that was brought over from this
I just don't
morning's
remember.
agenda.
Have we read it? Have we formally read this?
I read the title.
You already did?
Yes.
I'm losing it.
And could you give us your name for the record, please? Put your name into the record.
Oh, yes, thank you. So I'm Kim McCarty from the Portland Housing Bureau, and I'm here to answer your questions about increasing the amount of compensation to our subrecipient contractor, Impact Northwest. It's for two purposes. One is to increase the amount of resource that they have available to them when they help us with relocation of households that have experienced environmental hazards in the home, and those would include fire, mold, lead, issues of that nature. And then the second purpose is to help us with a new scope of service, and that is to relocate highly vulnerable households that have the relocation assistance because they are renters in a building that we're in the process of rehabbing.
Very good. Thank you. Colleagues, any questions before I ask if there's any public testimony on this item?
Is this an emergency?
This is an emergency,
We
so I'm
just lost our
waiting
quorum.
for Commissioner Fish. Here he is.
Oh,
Good.
here he comes.
Is there any public testimony on this item?
She's no longer here.
She's no longer
I
here. Is
saw her.
anybody here who wanted to testify on this item? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Fish.
Aye.
Udaley.
Aye.
Fritz.
Thank you very much for your patience today and for all your work. Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye, the ordinance is adopted. Thank you for your
Thank you.
patience. And the last item is 694.
Support Smart Autonomous Vehicle Initiative implementation.
So, colleagues, as you know, some number of weeks ago, Commissioner Saltzman and I held a press conference where we talked about the city's approach to autonomous vehicles. To be clear, when we talk about inviting autonomous vehicles into the community, what we're talking about is predominantly research. Self-driving cars are at best many years away. Just for the record, I'm told by experts that self-driving vehicles have never driven in excess of 1 mile on any city's streets. So we're very much in the early stages of this. We see this as an opportunity, unlike other technologies that were developed, adopted, and then brought into the community well ahead of a regulatory environment. We see an opportunity here with autonomous vehicles to get ahead of that curve and work with innovators and work with entrepreneurs in the autonomous vehicle space to make sure that rather than having this technology happen to us, this technology works for us. And I'm delighted that we have private sector partners and university and research partners who are willing to work with government to help make the most of this opportunity. They're an opportunity for us to begin to meet Vision Zero goals. It also is an opportunity for us to, as a city to meet our very aggressive climate action goals. They're an opportunity potentially to reduce congestion on our roadways. And most importantly, they're an opportunity for us to learn through testing to ensure that we know enough to both avoid the pitfalls that could come with disruptive technology and also know enough to make good decisions to keep us on the path towards meeting all of our goals. This request for information will take advantage of the opportunities around the autonomous vehicle space and help us to identify issues so that Portland can be proactive rather than reactive in this new space. Commissioner Saltzman has been with us every step on the way as the Transportation Commissioner. And Commissioner Saltzman, I'd like to offer you the opportunity to help me introduce this.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. As we've learned from the introduction of ride-sharing services, it is imperative to establish clear and effective rules early in the process to ensure those technologies produce community-wide benefits and most importantly, public safety. Cities have a lot to gain and lose from the widespread use of autonomous vehicles, and while the federal and state governments focus on the vehicles, the cities have a critical role in determining how these vehicles will be used. We have the authority and the responsibility to ensure that these new technologies protect the safety of the public and advance our goals. And because of that, Mayor Wheeler and I have launched the Smart Autonomous Vehicle Initiative, and we directed the Bureau of Transportation to bring forward the following set of actions. The first is to approve a request for information for autonomous vehicles pilot or test programs. Those will be drafted by both Bureau of Transportation and Procurement to engage the private sector in a way that ensures our standards and values are met. Second, we are directing the Bureau of Transportation to develop an autonomous vehicle policy and an interim administrative rule that establishes a clear path for innovators to apply to test, pilot, or deploy autonomous vehicles in the city of Portland. Lastly, we are directing the Bureau of Transportation to develop a public engagement strategy, as well as reporting on and evaluation plans. Transportation Director Leah Treat will come back to council on this set of actions. And I want to make it clear that before we begin, that what we are not approving is for autonomous vehicles to operate in the city. We are not doing that at this time or by this city action. As stated, PBOT will return with a policy, rules, and regulations for testing or piloting for the council to consider at a later date. Thank you.
Mayor, I have a friendly amendment I'll offer now.
Commissioner Fish.
Hand out and pass down, and it piggybacks nicely off of what Commissioner Saltzman has just said. Let's see if there's a second for my amendment.
Second.
Thank you. Mayor, I share Commissioner Saltzman in his opening remarks identified two issues that are important to me. One is making sure that the benefits are distributed fairly to our community, and the second is safety. I would say there's a third issue that we, I think, have to address sooner rather than later, and that is what is the cost of making changes to our infrastructure in order to accommodate autonomous vehicles. And I do not want any of our actions to be seen as simply assuming that we're going to spend money in a certain way to update our infrastructure so that autonomous vehicles can operate. And I do believe ultimately there's going to be both a cost associated with that and an equity lens we're going to have to use. For purposes of my amendment, it simply clarifies in what Commissioner Saltzman just previously said, that prior to issuing any permits for autonomous vehicle use or approving any pilot activities based on the request for information, the Portland Bureau of Transportation will bring a summary of the request for information responses and recommended actions to City Council.
Very good. And I know, Commissioner, you have a prior engagement, so why don't
this amendment has been accepted as a friendly amendment, but I'd be happy to have it put up for a vote.
why don't we do that just to make sure we've crossed the Ts and dotted the Is? Please call the roll.
Fish.
Thank you. Aye.
Saltzman.
Aye.
Udaly.
Aye.
Fritz.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Good amendment. Aye. The amendment's adopted. Thanks, Commissioner.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Saltzman and the rest of the City Council. As we had a little preview last week when we were talking about the Smart Cities Initiative, we are learning that autonomous vehicles are likely to dramatically change how people and goods move throughout the city of Portland. And in order to ensure that autonomous vehicles are going to serve the needs of the people of Portland, PBOT was directed to develop 4 actions by June 19th, which have already been articulated by Commissioner Saltzman. So today we're here to report back to you on our progress on those directions. Over the past 2 months, we have collaborated with our partner city bureaus, with ODOT, with Metro, and other city leaders in NACTO, which is the National Association of City Transportation Officials, and also with staff in Transportation for America. And so as a result of that, we are delivering to Council today a draft policy, a request for information, and a public engagement plan. If we want to achieve our Vision Zero goals, our equity goals, our economic goals, and our climate goals, we really need to establish very clear rules of the road for autonomous vehicles, and we have to establish them early, which is what we are intending to do. The intent of the draft policy is for new technologies to serve our goals rather than our streets serving new technologies. Everyone, Portlanders and autonomous vehicle companies, win when we have clear rules that require safety, prioritize trips that carry more people, integrate with transit, and improve access for all Portlanders to jobs and educational opportunities. Later this week, PBOT is going to post for public comment a draft administrative rule designed to ensure we have clear processes in place when an organization seeks to operate an autonomous vehicle on our streets. Our intent is to avoid the problems that we've seen in Pittsburgh that resulted from the lack of clear rules and reporting requirements. We believe that clear rules will create strong partnerships as well. So we obviously support the resolution before you today that directs us, PBOT, to manage the use of autonomous vehicles on Portland streets. And with that, I'm going to invite Art Pierce, Policy, Planning, and Projects Group Manager, and Kevin Martin, BPS's Smart Cities Manager, to provide you more details on how we're ensuring that AVs deliver more benefits than impacts to the city of Portland. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for having me. So I'm going to give a quick brief update on sort of where we are with the initiative and a little bit of background. It sounds like there's already been some really good conversation happening with the council just around smart cities in general and how autonomous vehicles may fit into that. We've been having very robust conversation with cities throughout the country about how to really articulate this vision very, very clearly and have, as technology gets introduced to the city, have it really be steered by us. And so I'm really pleased that we've made all the progress we have here. And there's a number of cities who are excitedly watching how our progress goes throughout the country, which is great. One piece that I think is important for us to understand is what do we mean by autonomy? So there's a useful graphic that we're showing here that shows various levels between 0 and 5 in terms of levels of autonomy. And so the levels 0, 1, and 2 are essentially the levels of autonomy that we commonly see now, which is essentially no automation at all or very little partial automation in terms of cruise control. We're starting to see some providers, automakers, heading into level 3 in terms of conditional automation, where there may be some instances where you're able to let the car or the vehicle take over. But the direction in terms of what we talk about of autonomous vehicles is really in this level of level 4 and 5 of either high automation or full automation. And so that's sort of the future that sparks the imagination of what might the world look like if we start to have vehicles that have this level of self-governing capabilities. The first questions that come to mind, and in fact, in a conversation with Commissioner Fritz yesterday, I think she even raised this exact question of, well, what happens to us all if we're being transported everywhere? And so the movie WALL-E gives us one dystopian future of people being advertised to and entertained as they're slurping big gulps and transported around their cities. And we know that's not what 10,000 steps look like. We know that the human body will not benefit from that level of being transported. And so that's one potential concern that we might want to consider. The other is around congestion. How can autonomous vehicles help impact congestion? One of the things that we know to be true is that a person driving themselves in a car, an Uber driver driving just one passenger in a car, or an autonomous vehicle driving just one passenger car makes no difference in terms of efficient use of the roadway. Portland's goals have been very, very clear. We're trying to make efficient use of the roadway system that we have. And the way to do that is to focus on making more efficient use. So for instance, getting more people to be using transit, more people to be biking and walking, we know will be better for our streets and for our citizens. And so understanding how we can govern autonomous vehicles to support this direction that we've established for the city and continue to move it, including using pricing as an incentive tool, is going to be very cool, very important for our future. One of the other areas that is of crucial importance to our city is around parking. And parking is becoming increasingly contested space in our cities, and we know that will only grow. There's a great benefit potentially of autonomous vehicles being able to head on to their next passenger rather than needing to park themselves. But then there's also definitely other implications. One of the other concerns that we have around the future of our city is around the cost of transportation and who bears higher cost transportation. And so we want autonomous vehicles to help not perpetuate this trend. Another item is in terms of how can we create great places, a city that we can be proud of. The postcard on the left is a literal postcard from Portland that from the 50s that said, "Be careful crossing the streets in Portland." We know that's not the future postcard that we want for this city. And so how can autonomous vehicles fit into our strategy of creating really great places that emphasize equity and health and access and safety and climate outcomes?
I kind of prefer the first postcard, just on an aesthetic level.
Right? So there's a number of ways in which there's a potential promise for autonomous vehicles. There's a belief that they can improve safety, reducing congestion, help with reducing climate pollution, improve freight benefits. But on the other side, there's a lot of potential concerns around what might be the inadvertent outcomes that we might see around either in the near term, around the incorporation of autonomous vehicles with mixed fleet of continued human driving. Also, the concern about if it is no longer a delay in your day to be in traffic. Maybe it won't matter as much to you that you're having a meeting, you're finishing your breakfast because you're being driven around, and it starts to make it so there's really no time penalty to being in a vehicle, and we'll just see more and more congestion on our streets without the incentive to switch over to other modes. Definitely a continued concern around health and climate. And then I think in particular, one of the real big concerns we want is we want to make sure we're addressing equity. If the benefits of autonomous vehicles really is only accrued to the wealthy, we haven't done our job well, and we're not going to be supporting continued transit ridership. Last couple relate to funding. We have a transportation system primarily funded through parking and fuel tax, and autonomous vehicles likely are to decrease that amount of funding. And then lastly, around jobs, we believe that there's a lot of concern around retraining of our population if we're going to have less people who have driving as their primary employment.
I would like you to please add social cohesion to that list, because if people can do everything by themselves and never have to talk to anybody, I think that's a definite threat to our sense of community, which is part of why we love Portland.
It's a good comment. Thank you. So one of the great things about Portland, and certainly what I've committed the last 20 years of my career towards, is using policy to help drive the future that we want to create. And through the recent adoption of the comprehensive plan and the transportation system plan, we have created really strong direction on where we want this city to go. We have the guidance of Vision Zero around equity, around climate, and a lot of it drives for us. There's a new acronym that's floating around through cities, which is FAVES, or Fleet Autonomous Vehicles that are Electric and Shared. And we think that that is a good representation as a platform that can help tell us what does good look like in terms of when autonomous vehicles are coming into a new city. So what we brought before you today, based on the directive of nearly 60 days ago, we thought we gave ourselves a lot of time, but it turns out 60 days goes very quickly, is a series of products. So we have the draft policy that has been delivered on to the Planning and Sustainability Commission, but we do have a draft before you today, and that will come back to this City Council for formal adoption later this fall. The request for information posted last Friday, and so that is out for industry response. We'll get that response later on this summer in August. The administrative rule is going to be posted later this week on our website for public comment. And then lastly, a public engagement plan. We've started to lay out the steps of how we might engage the public to talk about where it might be beneficial to see pilots occur in the city. Just for the sake of time, I may keep us moving quickly here, but I think one of the ways that we can see some of the exciting outcomes, certainly first last mile transit in East Portland, for instance, connecting folks who don't have full infrastructure to our existing transit system, late night or early morning types of connections to the rest of the transportation system. We see a lot of benefit where autonomous vehicles might be able to fit in where the rest of our system is not yet able to fully serve our citizens. So in terms of timeline, we're here with you today in the middle of June. We expect that we would be back to City Council coming in September once we've had an opportunity to compile the RFI responses, and that we would be then moving on through the adoption of the policy and consideration of potential pilots starting in late September, early October at the earliest. So we're happy to answer any question, and then we'll pass it on.
Great. Commissioner Udaly?
Yeah.
I'm sorry if you hit this already, but do you have a estimated timeline for when we might hit phases 4 and 5?
I really do not. There's a lot of assertions from various members of the industry around what might be possible, but I don't think we have even a clear understanding of how ready different elements are. There's certain providers that believe that they could come to that quite quickly, and so I think at this point the key for us was making sure that we were ready. We had clearly articulated the rules, so that if it took 1 year or 10 years, we were still ready regardless.
And these would be both privately owned and for hire? Or?
Potentially, I think we believe that the shared use model probably is better in terms of their function, but that's really sort of the Wild West in terms of understanding what the future might look like.
Yeah, I think my primary concern besides safety is the equity piece. Because some people are already shut out of our transportation for hire vehicles if you don't have a credit card or a bank account. So thank you for including that.
Okay. Maybe pass it on to Kevin, who's got some supportive remarks.
Yes.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you, Art. Thank you, Mayor Wheeler, rest of council. Thank you, Director Treat and PBOT, for inviting us here today. I'm Kevin Martin. I manage the Smart Cities team in the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. And I'm here today to express BPS's strong support for the Smart Autonomous Vehicles Initiative and the resolution before you here today. BPS commends PBOT for its effort at raising policy issues early so that autonomous vehicles technologies are in service of city goals and aspirations. Transportation accounts for nearly 40% of all local carbon emissions. Switching to low carbon fuels such as electricity is a key strategy in our climate action plan and our electric vehicle strategy. In the absence of policies to discourage single and zero occupancy trips, vehicle miles traveled may increase as AVs become more readily available to the general public. BPS supports developing policies that either encourage or require AVs to be shared and electric. The potential impacts, positive and negative, of autonomous vehicles go beyond transportation, with implications related to land use, climate, housing, emergency management, equity, and other goals described in our various city plans. From a land use perspective, AVs could impact our centers and corridors strategy and healthy connected neighborhood concepts. Space used for parking could have other uses if demand for parking decreases as a result of AVs. There may be less demand for retail storefront as e-commerce is expected to increase and as the ease of autonomous deliveries increases. Centers and corridors will need to be designed to be attractive for customers and residents and walking and biking to discourage people from relying on home deliveries or taking unnecessary trips in AV. Emerging AV technologies therefore have the potential to either contribute to city goals or to undermine our efforts. There are both risks and opportunities. BPS looks forward to working with PBOT, with the Mayor's Office, and with other city agencies in constructively engaging these new industries in support of our shared vision of Portland's future. Last week, City Council, as you may remember, adopted a resolution to establish a Smart Cities Steering Committee to help coordinate our Smart Cities work, including PBOT's Smart Autonomous Vehicles Initiative, across our city bureaus and commissioners' offices. Approaching this coming technology as a united city is critically important. We are excited to expand on the strong BPS-PBOT partnership to bring this discussion to the steering committee. We will also need to be coordinated in our efforts to engage the community, building on past outreach around our city initiatives and plans, to assess and address our residents' mobility, livability, and affordability needs, and to ensure that all Portlanders benefit from this technology. Finally, BPS is leading the Open Data Governance Program adopted by City Council back in May. There are important data implications to autonomous and connected vehicles. What data should be provided to the city as part of a pilot? Could Portland potentially inform a data standard around data coming from autonomous and connected vehicles? We've done this kind of thing before. Where will the data be stored and managed? And how will it be made available to the public and to city staff and leadership to evaluate this pilot to inform our decision-making? We look forward to continuing to support PBOT in this work and strongly support this initiative. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. If there's any more questions, we're happy to answer them. Otherwise, we have some invited testimony we can bring up.
Let's hear the invited testimony.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we have representatives from ODOT, Metro, TriMet, University of Oregon, and AARP.
Very good. Welcome. Good afternoon. Do you have a particular order?
Left to right.
Left to right.
Very good. That's how I usually do it.
Will Trade from Art. So good afternoon, Mayor Wheeler and Commissioners. I'm Jenna Adams-Kallick. I'm here on behalf of ODOT, and I'm happy to be here, and I wanted to thank our colleagues at PBOT who've been incredibly helpful and collaborative as we tackle this complex policy issue. ODOT shares many of the goals outlined in this resolution, most notably increasing safety. More than 400 people died in crashes on Oregon roads in 2015, which is unacceptable. We must continue to be vigilant and think creatively on how we can reduce crashes, including looking to technology. ODOT also recognizes the potential for increased mobility with the deployment of automated vehicles, from Portland residents connecting to transit to rural Oregonians with limited transportation choices, and everyone in between. Until state regulatory authority is established, ODOT can neither sanction nor prohibit AV testing in the state while a licensed driver is operating the vehicle. So we're very grateful that Portland's taking the lead. Currently, we have a voluntary notification process where AV companies can inform ODOT of their testing plans. And this form and more information about that process is on our website. And though it's not mandatory for companies to do this, it's been helpful for our agency to understand the scope of testing that's currently taking place in Oregon. We look forward to following the RFI and working closely with Portland as we eventually develop regulations for full-scale deployment. We're interested in a policy that maximizes safety and benefits for all Oregonians and does not create a restrictive patchwork of regulations, hampering the ability for the AV industry to thrive here in Oregon. So thank you again for your vision to improve safety and mobility in Portland, and we support the goals of this resolution and urge the council to approve.
Thank you. We appreciate it. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Tyler Frisbee. I'm the Policy and Innovation Manager for Metro. My team's job is to make sure that our transportation and land use policies keep pace with our transportation and land use plans, which, given the volume of planning that Metro does, is sometimes a challenge. I also want to applaud the city for moving forward today. There are, as you've heard, a lot of questions around autonomous vehicles. What is going to be their impact on safety? What is their, how are they going to improve our quality of life, maybe by helping us avoid something that many of us hate, driving in a car? Are they going to create more time for all of us? What are their impacts on our mode share? The city has ambitious mode share goals in terms of the number of people you want to move by transit or by bike or by walking. What do they mean for greenhouse gas emissions or congestion? And as flagged by Commissioner Udaley, what do they mean for our underserved communities and communities of color? It's impossible to answer these questions without data and without being able to monitor and understand the impact. So particularly when something comes from the private market, as autonomous vehicles will, it requires early government policy to help understand and protect the public interest. And we believe that the resolution in front of you today begins that process. It's consistent with the best practices across the country in terms of understanding autonomous vehicles and their impact on our communities, and it provides the city with the ability to understand and analyze the impact, and that creates the backbone for a regulatory system so that the city can respond as necessary. From the region's perspective, my team is kicking off a program to develop a regional autonomous vehicle policy, and that's, I think, particularly critical in the light of the work that you're doing, because the city can move forward, but if there's not regional support, you could be flooded with autonomous vehicles coming in from Hillsborough or from Gresham. And so creating a bottom line and a basic understanding that we can work together to implement is going to be really important. So I can't promise exactly what's going to be in that policy framework, but I can promise that we're here to be a good partner and support the work that you're doing.
And we appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of council. My name is Eric Hesse, Coordinator of Strategic Planning at TriMet and Policy Liaison to PBOT and BPS from TriMet. TriMet also applauds the City of Portland's recent launch of the Smart and Autonomous Vehicles Initiative, SAVVY. The initiative's four-pronged approach is a well-conceived and holistic strategy that will support the development of the strong policy framework needed to ensure the emerging transportation innovation and technologies serve our community livability goals and enhance the safety of our residents. We specifically applaud the city's decision to squarely define a preference for the FAVES model that you heard Art describe, because we believe that will be essential if these new technologies are to be supportive of the city's and the region's existing transportation, land use, equity, and climate goals. By setting terms of engagement through policy direction, while also creating clear opportunities for learning through partnership, Savvy will play a key role in advancing the city's and the region's understanding of and strategy for how best to harness these emerging technologies to help achieve our desired outcomes. It is a natural complement to the work that Metro is undertaking that you just heard about as part of the RTP update at this time. Transit plays a critical role in mobility and community building, helping manage congestion and helping keep our air clean in a space-efficient way that supports our regional and city land use policies and goals. Transit is also affordable and provides access to jobs, school, and community services, especially for those who are lower income and our communities of color. TriMet sees the opportunity for these emerging technologies, including AV, to complement our transit system, including options for first and last mile access and for other trips that extend the reach and accessibility of our regional transit system. The technology also holds the promise to help make transit even safer through operator assistance. As we partner both locally and nationally to build AV policy, we need to ensure that the evolution in technology and the emergence of potential new service models support the essential role that transit plays in serving and shaping our communities. Space on our roadways is limited, as is the room for transportation infrastructure that connect and serve centers and corridors, including the curb space where people and goods are picked up and dropped off. Transit remains essential to achieving the region's goals, and TriMet looks forward to continuing to work with our partners, both public and private, to use all of the latest tools to help all of the people in our community meet their needs, while easing congestion and reducing air pollution, making our region a better place to live. Thank you for taking this action, and we look forward to working with you.
We appreciate it. Thank you so much for being here. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners, for having me here. My name is Nico Larco, and I'm an associate professor at the University of Oregon, living and working here in Portland and teaching here in Portland. And I'm the co-director of the Sustainable Cities Initiative. Over the last 2 years, SCI has taken on a nationwide initiative we call Urbanism Next that focuses on how emerging technologies such as autonomous vehicles, e-commerce, and the sharing economy are affecting urban form, design, and development. This initiative is bringing together experts around the country from the private, public, and academic sectors to address these concerns. In this work, we found that most of the conversations around the country on the topic of autonomous vehicles has been around how to accommodate these vehicles and not on their secondary effects in cities or how to leverage this technology to help attain community goals. It's an important distinction and one that I'm heartened to see the City of Portland addressing as you put community goals first in your discussion and as reflected in the PBOT policies you have before you today. I encourage the Council to aggressively pursue the piloting and testing of these vehicles, but to do so in a way that's not only focused on testing the technology, but on testing their secondary impacts on cities and how this technology can be leveraged to achieve the outcomes we want. Autonomous vehicles are not a transportation issue, or not only a transportation issue. AVs will affect land use, land valuation, our labor force. There's currently 4 million driving jobs in this country, and the organization of our cities. AVs will cause shifts in how people travel that could dramatically challenge the viability of transit as we know it and could tremendously increase sprawl. Studies are showing dramatic increases in traffic congestion if vehicles are not shared or managed in fleets. The FAVES model is one that we favor absolutely. This will affect equity concerns, sustainability concerns, and will undoubtedly create challenges to quality of life. We're currently completing a study on the potential effects of autonomous vehicles on municipal budgets that shows this technology having disruptive, if not detrimental, effects on municipal revenues and expenses. For instance, AVs have been projected to reduce parking needs by as much as 90%. As parking revenue dwindles, this will challenge not only incoming municipal revenue, but also the financial viability of many parking structures that are backed by municipal bonds. There's also the cost that was mentioned before in terms of the cost of changes that we need to infrastructure. And as driving jobs are reduced, there will be a need for labor redistribution and training. Potential rises in unemployment could increase the city's need for workforce development services and housing assistance. There are definitely plus sides to this technology, safety being the highest among them, but also the opportunity to reshape cities without the need for parking, which will increase the development potential of properties and increase the feasibility of housing construction, which we know is of great importance to our city right now. I'm convinced that there's no greater threat, but also opportunity within our lifetime to affect a range of issues we hold dear, such as equity, sustainability, and quality of life. We're convinced this will be a transformational as the advent of automobiles was when they were first introduced. This could go in a positive or negative direction, but only if we're prepared, have forethought, and create policies that keep people and communities first, address secondary effects, and are proactive and not reactive. We believe Portland has the opportunity to lead the country in this area. It's a really fantastic moment in terms of framing and the people who are together thinking about these things. We support the goals of the PBOT policy that's before you and urge you to approve it. And we at SCI and University of Oregon look forward to helping with work around this issue.
Thank you. We appreciate that.
I'll reach over.
Actually, the mic moves. Probably easier.
I'm Jerry Cohn, State Director for AARP Oregon.
Thanks, Jerry.
I appreciate being here and appreciate a very savvy approach we support. I'll be brief because the handout you have hits a lot of the bullets. I'm just going to hit a few of those. Starting with the fact that disruption, obviously, as pointed out earlier by Commissioner Fish, was good, bad, and challenging. Opportunities, starting with equity. Clearly, when it comes to individuals isolated, at risk, low income, those with limited mobility of all ages, this provides a great opportunity and window of choice. It does obviously alter the landscape in many ways, but can promote livability in doing that. It also gets to choice, and so certainly when we talk about shared use mobility, we are talking about choice, particularly for the 1/3 of folks that do not drive. So let me hit a couple points in terms of questions. Safety. Certainly, safety is paramount. You've already heard it here. One specific policy AARP wants to hit on is to bar the use of partially automated vehicles on non-controlled access streets, i.e. mainly most city streets. That's level 4 from what was presented by PBOT before. Built environment, some questions that are both challenges and opportunities. Starting with the fact that most of us like to be dropped off right at the front door. Think of PDX and getting dropped off right at the departure, spot. Wish it could be right at the gate. Well, think about that when it comes to this type of opportunity. It does change then our street design. Parking can be an issue, not just where you park, but what to do with useless parking garages. Maybe a nice opportunity here. Continuous use of those vehicles. If they're a fleet, where do they go between rides? Do we redesign streets because of this? And does that also mean that we narrow lanes for drop-off lanes, as I said before, or bike lanes? So opportunity there. And speaking about bikes and walking as well, how does that address public health? It can maybe free up space for bikers and walkers, or it could create more of a challenge. Again, unintended consequences. Back to transit in public health and environment. Does it mean that we really don't need as much public transit? Or the flip side, does it mean that we're going to need perhaps more, or it's just a nice balance of what we have right now? And how does that affect where we live? Many millennials and boomers, if they can afford it, are moving into cities, Portland in particular. But what if I'm in a suburb, or what if I'm finding it's more affordable to stay in a suburb? Does this actually encourage sprawl, good or bad? So just think about how that can affect back to land use. Back to money, which was, I think, raised in the amendment by Commissioner Fish. How does this affect our revenues as well as expenditures? Fewer tickets, traffic tickets, fewer traffic police officers, which may save money, but also are there ways to track the need for repair on sensors of vehicles that may allow us to better anticipate what road work to pay for and to do? From the private sector, auto repairs, maybe not as many. Trucking and hauling, how is that going to affect the flow of trucks and commerce? As well as parking garages. Do we need more? Do we need to redesign? Do we even need them attached to buildings? Last and not least is the reality that this needs to be transparent. It needs to engage us consumers and users, particularly an array of diverse consumers. So on that note, I thank you all for taking this leadership, and we look forward to working with you.
Thank you. We appreciate all of your testimony, and thank you for your patience today. It's been a long afternoon, and some of you may have even learned something about land use and building appeals. Thank you.
If I may just compliment the AARP, this is a very comprehensive list of all of the things that we need to be thinking about, and I have not spotted all of these things, so thank you.
I can't say thank you, but it also what this has done, and a couple weeks ago I was able to be at a forum that the governor sponsored on this very issue, which is how I connected with Art and why I'm here today. But AARP is just beginning to really dive down deeply in terms of this issue. So anything I can get from our national team of volunteer leadership and staff, we'll be glad to share.
Thank you.
Great. And I just want to second what you've all raised here. There's a lot of opportunity here. There's also a tremendous amount of risk. And so I want to be clear by taking a leading role here and working with all of you and working with educators, nonprofits, innovators, and entrepreneurs. We're walking this walk together. We don't want this to be part of a dystopian future. We want, as I said right up front, we want the technology to work for us, not have it surprise us. And as you know, there's a lot of discussion about there in particular. What does this not only do for the environment, what does this do for congestion? What does this do for mobility? What does this do for the workforce and employment? And how do we take that walk together and not just treat this as yet another product where those selling the product can just walk away from the social consequences, because they could be dramatic. So I really appreciate everybody who's worked together to help make this a reality. I think it's a good first step, and it's a good framework for us to begin this process. So thank you for that. I don't know if we have any public testimony on this item. Could I ask how many people?
5 people signed up.
Very good.
The first 3 are Noah Siegel, Chris Hargerbaumer, and William Henderson.
And colleagues, are we in any danger of losing our quorum anytime soon? Okay, good enough. Thank you.
I'm already a missing impact, so that's all right.
There you go. Okay, 2 minutes, please. Name for the record.
My name is Noah Siegel. Many of you might know me from previous stuff, but I'm currently working.
Sorry, Noah, that mic's turned off. No, you can turn your
You
one
can
on.
turn it on, yeah.
This one's on.
You press the
Just
gray
press
button.
the base. Yeah, there you go.
Sorry, so I'm Noah Siegel. I'm currently working with a coalition of, an interesting coalition on the issue of congestion pricing. It includes my colleague here at the Oregon Environmental Council, the Port of Portland, Metro Regional Government, and the Nature Conservancy. I want to just keep my comments very short because it's been a long day, but there are a number of us. We just wanted you to know, first of all, how many organizations have a vested interest, are following and supporting what you're doing on this autonomous vehicles study and what the great work that PBOT is doing. I think we all care deeply about it and the outcomes, so we wanted to let you know that. Specifically, we wanted to let you know how important this issue of linking it to congestion pricing is. I'll leave you a full written testimony, but congestion pricing is important, even leaving aside the question of autonomous vehicles. But you add that in the mix. So at peak hours right now, during rush hour, as much as 25% of the traffic is entirely discretionary. Those trips don't have to be made at those times. We argue that by pricing those trips, you would encourage people to make different transportation choices, get better use out of your system, less GHG emissions, lots of good things. If you add into that autonomous vehicles and lots more discretionary trips, possibly with nobody even in the car, you're exacerbating that problem, not improving it. So pricing the roads and usage of those roads through a road user charge is a very important precedent to set early. I would just make the very specific point that the Origo technology, a voluntary program, currently exists through the state of Oregon. I would really encourage council to think about a future ordinance that requires autonomous vehicles to have that technology installed and used in their cars, because it's an easier transition to make to get people accustomed to something when it's brand new, as opposed to changing when they're already used to something. I just want to leave also the testimony of people who couldn't stay through the end. I just really wanted you to know that they were here. One is William Henderson from Business for a Better Portland, who wanted to come and lend his support to this effort. Point out that rideshare companies like Uber and Lyft already do surge pricing, which is a form of congestion pricing. They're just pocketing the profits, and so he wanted to make sure that we understood that this is a practice that's already done. And Joe Courtwright from Impreza Consulting, also along similar lines to what has been said, wanted to leave his written testimony in support of linking congestion pricing with autonomous vehicles. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. We appreciate that testimony.
Good evening. My name is Chris Hagerbaumer. I'm the Deputy Director at Oregon Environmental Council, and we primarily focus on state-level transportation issues. So I have testified many times at the Oregon Legislature, but I was thinking the last time I was here, it was a hearing on skateboarding and the streets. So it was with Mayor Katz, and it was like the most exciting hearing. It was fantastic, but that was a long time ago. So nice to be here, and thank you all so much for really getting ahead of the curve. And I basically, my testimony really reflects what folks on the earlier panel said, but one thing I thought about was way back when our great-grandparents or great-great-grandparents back in the late 1800s or early 1900s were thinking about the car. The car became the dominant. Cities thought we have to accommodate cars. It was the shiny thing of the future. I wonder if our great-grandparents ever said there could be some unintended consequences. And Commissioner Fritz, you mentioned the social cohesion. What are cities about? Cities are meant to bring people together for commerce, for socializing, and all those types of things. And cars actually drove people further apart, not closer together. So when we think about autonomous vehicles, you actually heard a lot of the negatives, and I will actually say that I think there are some real potential for positives, including that fact that more than 50% of the land in most cities, I'm not sure what it is in Portland, is devoted to the car, either the road or the parking. Wow, what if we could free up that space for more housing? The more housing we have, the lower housing prices. We get more affordable housing. If we can take some of that space currently devoted to cars on the streets and make protected bikeways and walkways. So there's a ton of potential, but people talked about all of the other potential negative consequences that I'm going to send my testimony in that repeats those. But the pricing piece that Noah mentioned is going to be critical. It's not just congestion pricing, but parking pricing and other types of pricing that I think can really make it go in the right direction rather than the wrong direction.
Yeah, if I could just comment on that, and I know it's been a long day, so nobody wants to hear me prattle on, myself included. But I will say this, where I feel like we've fallen short with some of these other new disruptive technologies is many of the companies that provide those technologies have cleverly figured out how to cream the profits off the top and shove the externalities on the broader society. And that's their profit model. And so our opportunity here is to actually figure out in advance how we push the externality costs onto the user or onto the provider as opposed to onto the public at large. And so that's one of the great challenges here is continuing to see that there is a potential win-win here, provided that we're willing to share those costs as opposed to have the public bear all of those externality costs. Yep. That's the end of my commercial on economics.
Can I just respond to that briefly?
Of course.
I agree with that, and I think that, one way of thinking about it is we had a virtuous circle for a long time with the gas tax, which is people wanted to drive, they loved their cars, they needed gas, they paid a gas tax, the gas tax built more roads, and the cycle went on for some 50 or 60 years. It hasn't been as effective of late for a variety of reasons. So I think there's a way to create a similar virtuous circle where people are paying for their infrastructure in a more positive system if we structure it that way with proper price signals ahead of time. So I totally agree, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
And the last two who signed up are Shedrick J. Wilkins and Lightning.
I don't see Cedric. I do see Lightning.
I'll be glad to take his minutes. I know you won't let me do that.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Lightning. I represent Lightning Super Watchdog X. Again, Transportation Department, I'm really disappointed. Great speeches, but let's talk about all the people that are become unemployed. The drivers. You really think these corporations, Google, Apple, Tesla, are putting all these billions of dollars in there to continue to pay labor costs for the drivers? It's not going to happen. We're looking at maybe 2020 to go driverless. And let me tell you something, projections are we're going to lose 3 to 5 million jobs national. If you look at just the commercial truckers alone at 3.5 million, they're going to save $168 billion per year by removing the drivers out of these trucks. You need to understand it's going to happen. We're going to have mass unemployment. We're going to have to create a universal basic income. We're going to have to look at this very close on looking at this, the same thing that happened in the manufacturing jobs back in early 2000, and we lost about 3 to 5 million jobs there. We're going to do the same thing right now on what we're talking about. Mass unemployment. You're going to have truckers that are going to revolt like you've never seen before, and you've experienced that with Uber. Get ready for it. Talk to these technology companies. What are we going to do about it before you enter with your autonomous vehicles? What are you going to do about it before you begin to chip away at our public transportation system, which Uber and Lyft have done by using Uber Pool, by dropping the cost down so low that they can use Uber or Lyft? Guess what's going to happen with these autonomous vehicles? No labor cost. They can drop those prices so low, they will be buying the infrastructure of the transportation department at a low cost. If you're going to sell these parking structures like I suggested, sell them now when you could get the highest value. And that's why I suggested that, to do it now. You have 5 parking structures, 3,800 parking spaces. Sell now while you can get the highest market value, because when they get set up, your values will plummet like the local taxi cab companies that you did not, well, the previous mayor did not protect their interest, which he could have done, was thinking very clear and implementing certain things in place to stop these technology companies from taking everything from the locals, and that's their jobs. Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate your testimony.
And I do really like Elon Musk. Keep up the good work.
Very good. Excellent. So, and that concludes our public testimony on this item. We've already voted to approve the amendment. Colleagues, do you have any more questions on this before we call the roll? Very good. Carla, please call the roll.
Saltzman?
Well, I want to thank Bureau of Transportation, Bureau of Planning and Sustainability for doing the work that the mayor and I called you to do. And although you're not finished yet, but it's moving along. And I do think, just to echo some of the sentiments that Lightning just said a minute ago, I don't think we can underestimate the impacts on labor of these changes. And we have to be more intentional about it than we have been, I think, on other innovations in our economy. And I think it's just a little too cavalier to think that we have such a dynamic economy that we can just naturally expect truck drivers to reemerge as chip makers or something like that. It's not that easy, and old traditions die hard, and I think we have to be intentional about how we think about and how we mitigate the displacement of labor that could come from the autonomous vehicles becoming more widespread. With that, I'm pleased to vote aye.
Fritz?
Well, thank you for bringing this resolution, colleagues, and thank you to the staff for doing it and for giving me the briefing. Let's learn from the lessons of the TNCs, the transportation network companies. That has put people out of work. The taxi drivers, the owner drivers are suffering because of that. Insurance is going to need to be much tighter than what we were able to get done on the TNC regulations. We need to make sure that people who are injured by these vehicles, that it's seen as a commercial vehicle, and they are, if that's what they are, and that there's a way that people can get compensated. Like the discussions we had a year or two ago, providing services for people experiencing disabilities, and making sure that these autonomous vehicles, who's going to help somebody who might need assistance getting into them? Are they going to be wheelchair accessible? That's a big concern that needs to be addressed. And similarly, if you're going to have shared vehicles, what about the safety of the occupants who haven't met each other before? When I get on a bus, or there are people around me, there's a driver, and if there's something that's a problem, the driver will contact police and that will happen. Who takes care of people, even worse than Uber and Lyft, when people are unscrupulous, and that also needs to be addressed. And then finally, regarding the issue of whether garages are going to not be necessary anymore, either way, we've got a problem. If there aren't any parked cars, that means they're all circulating round and round and round, causing congestion. If they're not circulating round and round and round, then they need somewhere to stay until they're called to the next stop. So it's very wise that that you're looking at this right now and figuring out how to get ahead of it. I certainly don't want to be in the reactive mode as we had to be with some of the other technologies that we've had coming here. I do think that it can be a safety thing. I was actually on an airplane where after it landed, the pilot came on and said, this plane just landed itself. Of course, I was there in case anything went wrong. And I was like, glad he didn't say that before we started down, because I would have been a basket case. But, you know, we do have cruise control on cars right now. There's all kinds of technologies that didn't exist when I was learning to drive, for example. And I would very much like to have a car that would park itself. That would be fabulous. So thank you all for all your work. Aye.
Wheeler.
So I'll be brief and to the point. I think I've already spoken most of my piece on this. This testimony raises lots of questions, and I think we have to be clear. We don't know exactly where the autonomous vehicle movement is headed. We do know that it has the potential to impact the global economy and global social structures. And we know that this technology is coming. There's no question about that. Nobody disputes it, although there's lots of questions about how quickly the technology will be adapted, how quickly it will actually be able to function. I happen to be one of those who think that for some applications, it's going to happen relatively quickly. For widespread, citywide or statewide or society-wide applications, it's going to take a long time. And I'll just give you one example. When you're in a car and you're driving it and you're going down Marine Drive and a child runs out into the street and you have a split second to decide, do I run over the child or do I drive off the road? I'd like to think I'm driving off the road. But if a car is programmed for a safety protocol, how does it make that decision? It is a moral choice as opposed to a technology or a platform-driven solution. So there's lots of questions around ethics. There's lots of questions around technology. There's questions around infrastructure. The gentleman who testified raised the, I think, very real question about what does this do for economic structures, not just locally, but globally? And what are the social implications of the disruptive nature of this technology? So these are heady issues. But I think it's very important, if we accept the reality that it's coming, it makes sense for us as policy leaders to get ahead of the curve and be able to help drive the conversations. And it won't just be the city of Portland. I'm proud that we're taking a leadership role, but at the end of the day, as I say, this has global implications, and ultimately we're going to be wrestling with this technology question on a global scale. But we would be irresponsible, I believe, to simply stick our head in the sand and assume it's not coming. I believe this resolution that we're passing captures the appropriate sense of both opportunity on one hand, and you heard people describing possible economic opportunities, possible mobility opportunities, possible opportunities around achieving our climate action goals, but we're balancing that with the very real sense that there are major unanswered questions that still provide a tremendous amount of risk to this community. So I think it's entirely the appropriate thing to do. We have the right players at the table. We have government, we have nonprofit leaders, we have innovators, we have academics, we have our private sector entrepreneurs working with us. This is exactly the right platform, and I applaud the hard work that's gone into this. Commissioner Saltzman, thank you again for your leadership as our Transportation Commissioner. To our amazing transportation team, thank you. To everybody who came today to testify on behalf of this resolution, I'm very grateful. I vote aye. The resolution's adopted as amended, and we are adjourned.
All right.